He was supposed to kill her the moment he found her. That was the plan. That was the oath he carved into his own flesh the night they butchered his father. But when Alpha King Ronan Vale finally stood face to face with the daughter of his sworn enemy, the one thing he never expected hit him harder than any blade. The mate bond snapped into place like a chain around his throat, binding him to the very bloodline he'd spent 10 years trying to erase. Now he's got a choice: destroy her like he promised, or break every vow he ever made. Stick around till the end of this story. You're going to want to see how far a king will fall when fate decides to spit in his face. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my pack is listening. The scent of burnt cedar and wolf's blood still clung to the stones of the Iron Throne Hall even after a decade. Ronan Vale stood at the base of the dais, staring at the throne he'd inherited too young, won too bloody, and held too tight. The hall stretched vast and cold around him, all granite columns and iron braziers throwing shadows that moved like ghosts. 30 feet above, the vaulted ceiling disappeared into darkness. The architect who'd built this place 300 years ago understood something fundamental about power. It should make a man feel small before it made him feel strong. Outside the reinforced windows, snow fell in thick curtains over the northern kingdom. Always snowing, always cold. The kind of cold that got into your bones and reminded you that survival wasn't guaranteed, that weakness meant death, that the world didn't owe you warmth just because you wanted it. He was 28 years old and he'd been king for 10 of them. His reflection stared back from the polished black stone of the throne. Tall, broad-shouldered, built like the weapon he'd turned himself into. Dark hair pulled back tight, ice-blue eyes that people said looked like his father's, right up until they noticed the hardness in them that his father never had. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, souvenir from the Blood Moon War, from the night everything burned, the night they killed his father in front of him. Ronan's hand moved to his chest, fingers tracing the raised scar tissue beneath his shirt. The oath he'd carved there himself, alone in this hall, 17 years old and shaking with rage. 7 words in the old tongue. Every surviving Nightfang dies screaming. He'd kept that promise, methodically, ruthlessly, for 10 years. Except now there was one left. The sound of boots on stone pulled him from the memory. His beta, Marcus Thorne, entered through the eastern archway. 40 years old, gray threading through his beard, built like a man who'd survived 3 wars by being too stubborn to die. He carried a leather dispatch case and wore the expression of someone about to deliver news his king wouldn't like. They confirmed it, Marcus said without preamble. She'll be at the summit. Ronan's jaw tightened. Celine Ravarin, Marcus confirmed. Last surviving child of Aldrich Ravarin. The Western Pax are hosting her as a diplomatic guest. She's requested formal attendance at the Lunar Summit under the Accord of Neutral Ground. How convenient. Ronan turned away from the throne, moving to the war table that dominated the eastern end of the hall. A map of the werewolf territories spread across it, marked with iron pins and red thread. The northern kingdom in white, the western Pax in gray. And there, in the mountains to the southwest, a single black pin marking the last known location of the Nightfang clan's stronghold, now nothing but ash and memory. The Accord hasn't been invoked in 15 years. Why now? Marcus set the dispatch case on the table. The Western Alphas claim she came to them 3 months ago, alone, unarmed, asking for sanctuary. And they gave it to her. They gave it to her? Ronan's hand curled into a fist on the table's edge. The wood creaked. Aldrich Ravarin's daughter, the same bloodline that sent assassins into this fortress, that cut my father's throat during a peace negotiation, that started the war that killed 2,000 wolves across 6 territories. His voice dropped to something colder than the wind outside. And the Western Pax thought it was wise to offer her protection. They're calling it a gesture of reconciliation, Marcus said carefully. There's talk she wants to discuss peace terms. Peace. Ronan laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. 10 years I've spent hunting every Nightfang that survived the war. Every assassin, every soldier, every sympathizer who gave them shelter. I hanged them in their own territories. I burned their safe houses. I made sure everyone in every pack from here to the southern coast understood what happens when you raise a hand against the Northern King. He looked at Marcus. And now the last one, The daughter of the man who orchestrated the whole thing wants to discuss peace. You don't have to go, Marcus said. Send an envoy. Make your position clear. I'm going. Ronan, I'm going, Ronan repeated, and the weight of command in his voice ended the debate. The Lunar Summit requires the attendance of all major pack leaders. If I refuse, it shows weakness. If I send someone else, it shows fear. He straightened, rolling his shoulders. Besides, I want to look her in the eyes when I tell her exactly what I think of her peace terms. Marcus studied him for a long moment. They'd known each other since Ronan was 8 years old, since before the crown, before the war, before everything turned to blood and ash. If anyone in the kingdom could read Ronan's tells, it was him. This isn't about politics, Marcus said quietly. No, Ronan agreed. It's about a promise. He touched the scar on his chest again. Every surviving Nightfang dies screaming. Marcus sighed. The summit's in 6 days. We'll need to leave tomorrow to reach the Western Territory in time. Make the arrangements. Full honor guard. I want 50 of our best fighters. And Marcus? Ronan met his beta's eyes. Tell them to be ready for anything. You think it's a trap? I think the Nightfang clan spent a decade proving they'll use any tactic to win. Poison, ambush, false diplomacy. He gestured at the map. Aldrich Raverin sent his own daughter into enemy territory. Either she's bait for something larger, or she's desperate. Either way, I'm not walking into the Western Packs with my guard down. Marcus nodded and turned to leave, then hesitated. For what it's worth, your father wouldn't have wanted you to spend your whole life on vengeance. Ronan's expression didn't change. My father's dead because he believed in mercy. I learned from his mistake. When Marcus left, Ronan stood alone in the throne hall again, staring at the map. His finger traced the route from the Northern Kingdom to the Western Territory. 3 days' hard ride through mountain passes and frozen valleys. 3 days to prepare for the moment he'd been waiting 10 years to have. He wondered what she looked like, the daughter of his enemy. He'd seen sketches from informants over the years. Dark hair, pale skin, the Nightfang crest marked somewhere on her body like all their bloodline. But sketches were just lines on paper. They didn't tell you how a person moved, how they spoke, whether they had their father's eyes, whether they'd begged before they died. Ronan closed his eyes and pulled up the memory he kept locked in the coldest part of his mind, the one he only opened when he needed to remember why mercy was weakness. 17 years old. The Peace Summit in the Grand Hall. His father, King Aldrin Vale, standing at the treaty table with Aldrich Raverin across from him, both men smiling, both believing that 10 generations of territorial conflict could end with signatures on parchment. Ronan had been standing guard at his father's shoulder, close enough to see the knife that came from nowhere, close enough to smell the poison on the blade, close enough to catch his father as he fell, blood spreading across his formal robes like spilled wine, close enough to see Aldrich Raverin's smile never waver. The Nightfang clan had poured into the hall within seconds, planned, coordinated. They'd killed 12 northern wolves before anyone could react. By the time Ronan shifted and fought his way to his father's body, Aldrich and his people were gone. King Aldrin Vale died in his son's arms, choking on his own blood, trying to speak but managing only wet, rattling gasps. Ronan had held him and felt the exact moment the life left his eyes. That was the night the Blood Moon War started. That was the night Ronan learned that trust got you killed, and peace was a lie weak men told themselves. And that was the night he carved a promise into his own flesh that he'd finish what they started. He opened his eyes. 6 days until he met Celine Raverin. 6 days until he decided whether to honor the accord of neutral ground or break it and finish what her father began. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made his own advisors nervous. Let her come. Let her talk about peace and reconciliation and whatever pretty words she'd prepared. He'd listen to her speak, and then he'd watch her die. But the journey to the Western Territory took 4 days instead of 3 because winter in the mountain passes didn't care about royal schedules. Ronan rode at the head of the column, 50 northern warriors spread out behind him in tight formation. They moved through landscapes that would have been beautiful if beauty meant anything to men who lived by violence. Snow-covered pines, frozen waterfalls, valleys so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. Marcus rode beside him, silent most of the time, which Ronan appreciated. Some men filled silence with useless words. Marcus understood that quiet was its own kind of communication. On the third night, they made camp in a clearing surrounded by rock faces that broke the worst of the wind. The warriors set up the command tent and posted sentries in a perimeter that would have made a military tactician weep with pride. These weren't ceremonial guards. They were wolves who'd survived the Blood Moon War and the brutal decade that followed. Hard men who understood that safety was earned through vigilance, not assumed. Ronan sat in his tent, studying reports by lamplight, patrol logs, intelligence briefings, a detailed accounting of every known associate of the Nightfang clan still breathing, which wasn't many. He'd been thorough. Marcus entered without knocking. Western scouts spotted us an hour ago. They'll be expecting our arrival tomorrow evening. Good. Ronan set down the report he'd been reading. Any word on the other summit attendees? The Southern Coalition is sending 3 alphas. The Eastern Conclave has 2 representatives, and the Western Pacts will have their full council present. That's 7 alphas, plus their entourages. Marcus poured himself a drink from the flask on the field desk. It'll be the largest gathering of pack leaders in a decade. All there to see the daughter of Aldrich Raverin plead for peace. Ronan leaned back in his chair. The politics alone are going to be a nightmare. The Southern Coalition still blames the Nightfang clan for the trade route disruptions during the war, Marcus said. They won't be sympathetic. And the Eastern Conclave lost an entire settlement to Nightfang raids 5 years ago. They're going to want blood. Then they'll be disappointed. She's mine. Marcus took a slow sip. You're really going to kill her at a neutral summit in front of every major pack leader in the territories. I'm going to honor my promise, Ronan corrected. What happens after that depends on whether anyone's stupid enough to stand in my way. This will start another war. Then it starts another war. Ronan stood, moving to the tent opening. Outside, his warriors moved through the camp with practiced efficiency. These men would follow him into death itself if he asked. They'd proven it. I didn't ask for this, Marcus. I didn't want to be the king who spends a decade hunting ghosts through frozen mountains. But the Nightfang clan made that choice when they murdered my father during a peace talk. He turned back. So yes, I'm going to finish what they started. And if the other packs have a problem with it, they can join her. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, your father believed in second chances. My father died believing in second chances, Ronan said flatly. I learned from his mistake. The next day they reached the Western Territory just as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. The summit was being held at Clearwater Hold, a massive stone fortress built into the mountainside overlooking a valley of pine forests and frozen lakes. Centuries old, neutral ground by treaty law, no pack could claim it, and violence within its walls was forbidden under penalty of exile from all territories. In theory, Ronan had never put much faith in theory. The Western Alphas met them at the main gate. 7 of them, standing in a semicircle like they'd rehearsed it. Alpha Garrett, the eldest, stepped forward, 60 years old and still built like a man who could break bones with his bare hands. Alpha King Ronan, Garrett said, inclining his head with the bare minimum of respect protocol required. Welcome to Clearwater Hold. Your arrival is witnessed under the Accord of Neutral Ground. No wolf may raise violence against another within these walls, on penalty of death and exile. I'm familiar with the accord, Ronan said, dismounting. His boots hit stone with a sound like a judge's gavel. I'm also familiar with how well it worked the last time my family trusted neutral ground. Garrett's expression didn't change. The Blood Moon War happened before my time as Alpha. What occurred then has no bearing on what happens here. Doesn't it? Ronan gestured to his warriors. They dismounted in perfect synchronization, a display of discipline that made the Western Guards look like amateurs. Because from where I stand, the last surviving member of the clan that murdered my father is currently under your protection. That seems pretty relevant. Celine Ravarian came to us as a supplicant, another Alpha said. Kara, younger, aggressive. She's requested formal audience at the summit. We granted it under the laws of sanctuary that predate any of our bloodlines. How noble, Ronan said dryly, and convenient. You're welcome to leave if you find the arrangements unsatisfactory, Kara shot back. Marcus moved forward subtly, a clear warning in his posture, but Ronan raised a hand. I'll stay, but understand something. He looked at each of the Western Alphas in turn. If Celine Ravarin makes one wrong move, if I smell even a hint of deception, I'll kill her myself. Accord or no accord, and anyone who tries to stop me will join her. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded violence. Then Garrett nodded slowly. Your position is noted. The summit begins at sunset. Your quarters are in the eastern wing. I suggest you use the time to compose yourself. Ronan smiled without warmth. I'm perfectly composed. He moved past them into the fortress, Marcus and 20 of his personal guard following. The remaining 30 would secure the perimeter and make sure no surprises waited in the shadows. Clearwater Hold's interior was all carved stone and ancient timber. Tapestries depicting historical pack alliances lined the walls. Braziers cast flickering light across floors worn smooth by centuries of wolf feet. Servants moved through the corridors like ghosts, eyes down, trained not to make eye contact with visiting alphas. Their quarters were exactly what Ronan expected: functional, defensible, and positioned so the Western Alphas could monitor who came and went. He didn't care. He wasn't here for comfort. Marcus checked the room for threats while Ronan stood at the window, looking down at the valley below. Somewhere in this fortress, Celine Ravarin was preparing for the summit, preparing to make her case for peace to an audience that included the man who'd sworn to kill everyone in her bloodline. He wondered if she was afraid. He hoped she was. 2 hours until sunset, Marcus said, finishing his security sweep. You should eat something. I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten since yesterday. You need to keep your strength up. Ronan shot him a look. I appreciate the concern, Mother. Marcus didn't smile. I'm serious. You're walking into a room full of alphas who are going to be watching your every move. If you show weakness, I won't. If you lose control, I won't, Ronan repeated harder. I've been planning this for 10 years, Marcus. I'm not going to lose control because I'm hungry. Marcus studied him, then nodded. Fine, but for the record, I think this is a mistake. Noted. When Marcus left to brief the guard rotation, Ronan sat alone in the quarters and let himself feel the weight of the moment. 10 years. 10 years of hunting, of blood, of waking up in the middle of the night with his father's death playing on repeat behind his eyes. 10 years of turning himself into something hard and cold and efficient because soft men didn't survive in a world where peace talks ended in murder. He touched the scar on his chest. Every surviving Night Fang dies screaming. Tonight, he'd keep that promise. And maybe, just maybe, he'd finally be able to sleep without seeing his father's eyes go empty. The summit hall was a cathedral of stone and shadow. Ronan entered through the main archway and felt the temperature drop. Not from cold, but from the collective weight of every alpha in the room turning to watch him. The hall stretched 100 feet across, circular, with tiered seating carved directly into the stone walls. In the center, a raised platform held the speaker's circle, neutral ground within neutral ground, where those requesting audience would make their case. The other alphas were already seated. Southern Coalition to the left, 3 hard-faced wolves who looked like they'd been carved from desert rock. Eastern Conclave to the right, 2 older alphas wearing expressions of carefully controlled grief. The Western Council occupied the far side, 7 strong, Garrett at the center. And in the highest tier, positioned so everyone could see him, Ronan took his seat. Below the speaker's circle stood empty. The hall filled slowly. Betas, advisors, witnesses. By the time the sun touched the horizon outside, there were easily 200 wolves packed into the space. The air hummed with tension and the barely restrained power of alphas who didn't particularly like each other being forced into close proximity. Garrett stood. The lunar summit is called to order under the Accord of Neutral Ground. All who enter this circle do so with the protection of ancient law. Let no wolf raise violence against another, on penalty of death and exile from all territories. The ritual words echoed off stone. Tonight we hear from one who has requested sanctuary and audience, Garrett continued. By law, she is granted safe conduct and the right to speak. By tradition, she will be heard without interruption. He paused. Celine Ravarin, enter the circle. Ronan leaned forward. A door opened on the eastern side of the hall, and she walked in. The world stopped. Ronan felt it the second she crossed the threshold. A sensation like lightning striking his spine, like something fundamental shifting in the architecture of reality. His wolf surged forward inside him, sudden and violent, demanding attention. No. She moved toward the speaker's circle with the kind of calm that came from either absolute confidence or absolute acceptance of death. Dark hair falling past her shoulders, pale skin that seemed to absorb the torchlight rather than reflect it. She wore simple traveling clothes, leather and wool, but carried herself like royalty. And her eyes, storm gray, direct, unflinching. She stepped into the center of the circle and looked up at the tiers of watching alphas. Her gaze moved across the Southern Coalition, the Eastern Conclave, the Western Council. Then she looked directly at Ronan, and the mate bond snapped into place like a chain around his throat. The recognition hit him with physical force, ancient, undeniable, the kind of connection that predated law and choice and revenge. His wolf screamed inside him, clawing at his control, demanding he go to her, claim her, protect her. Mine. No. Ronan's hands gripped the stone armrest of his seat hard enough to crack it. His breath came short and sharp. Every instinct he'd spent 10 years honing into weapons screamed at him to move, to act, to acknowledge what his body had just recognized. His fated mate, Celine Ravarin, the daughter of the man who murdered his father. She was still looking at him, and in her eyes he saw the exact moment she felt it too. The widening, the sharp intake of breath, the way her hand moved unconsciously to her chest. She felt it. She knew. And the expression that crossed her face wasn't joy or relief or any of the things the old stories said happened when mates found each other. It was devastation. Garrett's voice cut through the moment like a blade. Celine Ravarin, you stand in the speaker's circle under the protection of the Accord. State your purpose. Celine tore her gaze away from Ronan. When she spoke, her voice carried across the hall without strain, clear, steady, controlled. I come before this summit to speak truth that has been buried for 10 years, she said. The Blood Moon War was built on lies. My father did not kill King Aldrin Vale. The Nightfang clan did not start that war. She paused. We were all betrayed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ronan barely heard them over the roaring in his ears. That's a bold claim, one of the Southern Alphas called out. Do you have proof? I have evidence, Celine said, and I have testimony. But more importantly, I have questions that no one has been willing to ask. She looked up at Ronan again. 10 years ago, the Nightfang clan and the Northern Kingdom were on the verge of a historic peace treaty. Both sides had everything to gain and nothing to lose. Why would my father, who spent his entire life trying to end the territorial conflicts, suddenly choose to destroy that peace by murdering King Aldrin during the signing? Because he was a liar, Ronan heard himself say. His voice came out rough, barely controlled. Because the Nightfang clan wanted the northern territories and saw an opportunity. Then why did he die 6 months later? Celine shot back. If my father orchestrated the war, why was he assassinated in his own stronghold by someone who knew every detail of our security? Silence. Someone wanted both our families destroyed, Celine continued. Someone who benefited from the Blood Moon War. Someone who's been moving in the shadows for a decade while we tore each other apart. She straightened. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to offer an alliance. Because whatever's been hunting my clan has started targeting others. And if we don't stop it, the Blood Moon War will look like mercy compared to what's coming. The hall erupted. Alphas shouting, advisors arguing, the Southern Coalition demanding proof, the Eastern Conclave calling for her arrest. But Ronan heard none of it. He was staring at Celine Ravarin, his fated mate, the last surviving Nightfang, the woman he'd sworn to kill, and feeling his entire world crack apart. The mate bond pulled at him like a physical thing, demanding he protect her from the hostility in the room. The promise carved into his chest demanded he destroy her for the bloodline she carried. And somewhere between those two absolute truths, Ronan Vale felt something inside him break. Garrett was calling for order, his voice booming across the chaos, but it was background noise. Celine stood in the speaker's circle, alone, surrounded by alphas who wanted her dead. And she was looking at Ronan like she knew exactly what war was happening inside him, because she was fighting the same one. The mate bond didn't care about revenge, didn't care about promises or bloodlines or decade-old wars. It was ancient and absolute and completely indifferent to human concepts like justice. It just was. Marcus appeared at Ronan's shoulder. "We need to leave. Now." "What?" "Look at yourself," Marcus said quietly. "Your eyes are shifting. Your control is slipping. Every alpha in this room can smell what just happened. If you don't get out of here right now, you're going to do something you can't take back." Ronan looked down at his hands. Claws had partially extended without him realizing it. His vision had sharpened to the point where he could count individual threads in Celine's clothes from 50 feet away. The mate bond was trying to force a shift. "Move," Marcus said. Ronan stood, the motion sharp enough to draw every eye in the hall. He looked at Celine one more time, saw her watching him with an expression he couldn't read, and then turned and walked out. He made it halfway down the corridor before the rage hit. His fist went through the stone wall hard enough to shatter bone. Pain exploded up his arm, but he barely felt it. He hit the wall again. Again. Marcus grabbed his shoulder and Ronan spun, snarling, halfway to a full shift. "Breathe," Marcus said firmly. "Alpha! Breathe!" Ronan forced air into his lungs, forced his claws to retract, forced his vision to clear. When he could speak again, his voice came out like gravel. "It's her. I know. The mate bond. It's her. I know," Marcus repeated. "The whole hall knows. You weren't exactly subtle." Ronan laughed, and it sounded half mad. 10 years. 10 years I've been hunting her family, and the universe decides she's my fated mate." He looked at Marcus. "How's that for cosmic irony?" "What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? Ronan touched the scar on his chest. Every surviving Nightfang dies screaming. But the mate bond was already working on him, rewriting instincts, changing the fundamental equation of who he was supposed to protect versus who he was supposed to destroy. He thought of Celine standing in the speaker's circle, alone, surrounded by enemies, claiming her father was innocent, claiming they'd all been betrayed. He thought of his father dying in his arms, and he thought of the promise he'd carved into his own flesh. "I'm going to find out if she's telling the truth," Ronan said finally. "And if she is, I'm going to kill whoever actually murdered my father." He met Marcus's eyes. "And if she's lying," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Behind them, voices echoed from the summit hall. Argument, accusation, demands for justice. And somewhere in that chaos, Celine Raverin stood in the speaker's circle, probably wondering if the mate bond she'd just felt was going to save her life or end it. Ronan wondered the same thing, because right now, he genuinely didn't know which impulse was stronger. The need to claim her or the need to kill her. And that terrified him more than anything he'd faced in 10 years of war. The corridor outside the summit hall smelled like old stone and the kind of tension that preceded bloodshed. Ronan stood with his back against the wall, breathing through the urge to shift and tear something apart. His knuckles were bleeding where he'd punched through granite. The pain helped. Not much, but enough to keep him grounded in his human form instead of letting the wolf take over and do what every instinct in his body was screaming at him to do. Go back, claim her, protect her, kill anyone who threatens her. Marcus stood 5 feet away, positioned between Ronan and the summit hall like he understood exactly what kind of war was happening inside his king's head. Smart man. 10 years together meant he could read the signs, the way Ronan's shoulders had gone rigid, the way his breathing had turned shallow and controlled, the way his eyes kept tracking back toward the hall even though he'd forced himself to leave. The mate bond was a living thing now. Not a concept, not a myth from the old stories, a physical pull in his chest that made every step away from Celine Raverin feel like walking against a rip current. 3 members of Ronan's personal guard appeared at the corridor intersection, weapons ready, eyes scanning for threats. They'd felt their king's distress through the pack link and responded the way trained soldiers did, with violence held in check but ready to deploy. Marcus waved them back without taking his eyes off Ronan. Inside the summit hall, voices were still raised, Garrett trying to restore order, the Southern Coalition demanding answers, someone, sounded like Kara from the Western Council, calling for Celine to provide proof of her claims before the Alphas tore each other apart arguing about it. Ronan could pick out Celine's voice among the chaos. Steady, calm, like she was discussing weather patterns instead of accusing someone of orchestrating a decade-long conspiracy that got thousands of wolves killed. She was either the bravest person he'd ever encountered or the most delusional. Or she was telling the truth. That possibility sat in his mind like a blade lodged between ribs. Because if she was telling the truth, if the Nightfang clan hadn't murdered his father, if someone else had orchestrated the Blood Moon War, then everything Ronan had built his entire adult life around was a lie. The promise carved into his chest, the 10 years of hunting, the wolves he'd executed in the name of justice, all of it based on a false premise. His hand moved to the scar without conscious thought. Every surviving Nightfang dies screaming, except now his body was telling him that the last Nightfang was supposed to be his mate, the one person in the entire world he was meant to protect above all others. The cosmic joke of it would have been funny if it wasn't currently ripping him apart from the inside. Marcus finally spoke. "We need to make a decision. The summit's going to break soon. When it does, every alpha in that hall is going to want to talk to you. They're going to want to know what you're planning to do about her." "I don't know what I'm planning to do about her," Ronan said through clenched teeth. "That's a problem." "You think I don't know that?" A door opened at the far end of the corridor. 2 Western guards stepped out, saw Ronan, and immediately moved their hands to their weapons. Not drawing, just ready. The kind of body language that said they understood exactly how dangerous this situation had become. Behind them, the summit hall doors swung open. Alphas poured out in clusters, already forming the political alliances that would define how the territories responded to Celine's claims. The Southern Coalition moved as a unit, faces carved from stone, clearly planning their next move. The Eastern Conclave looked shaken, probably because the possibility that they'd spent 5 years blaming the wrong enemy for their losses was settling in. And then Celine emerged, flanked by 4 Western guards who looked like they'd been assigned suicide duty. The mate bond yanked at Ronan's chest hard enough to make him take a step forward before he caught himself. Celine's eyes found him immediately across the crowded corridor. For 3 seconds, they just stared at each other while wolves flowed around them like water around stones. Up close, well, closer than 50 feet in a tiered hall, Ronan could see details his wolf had been cataloging since the moment she walked into the speaker's circle. The way she held herself, spine straight despite being surrounded by enemies. The small scar above her left eyebrow. The slight tremor in her hands that she was trying to hide by keeping them clasped in front of her. She was afraid. She was hiding it well, but she was afraid. And some part of Ronan that he didn't want to acknowledge felt the urge to step between her and everyone else in this corridor, bare his teeth, and make it clear that anyone who wanted to hurt her would have to go through him first. He crushed that urge like he was crushing bone. Garrett materialized beside Celine, his expression the careful neutral of an alpha trying to prevent a massacre in his own fortress. "Alpha King Ronan, perhaps we should speak privately." "Perhaps we should," Ronan agreed, not taking his eyes off Celine. They were escorted to a council room off the main corridor. Stone walls, heavy table, chairs that had probably witnessed 1,000 tense negotiations. Just Ronan, Marcus, Garrett, Celine, and 2 Western guards who looked ready to die protecting their charge. The moment the door closed, Garrett turned to Ronan. "I need to know right now if you're going to honor the Accord of Neutral Ground." "That depends," Ronan said. "Is she under arrest or under protection?" "She requested sanctuary. Under our laws..." "Your laws don't supersede the blood debt her family owes mine." "The Accord supersedes everything," Garrett shot back. "You know that. Your father helped write the current treaty." Ronan's jaw tightened at the mention of his father. "My father's dead because he trusted the wrong people." "Then don't make his mistake," Celine said quietly. Every eye in the room turned to her. She was looking directly at Ronan with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not pleading, not afraid exactly. Something harder. Something that looked almost like understanding. "You felt it," she continued. "In the summit hall. The mate bond." She paused. "I felt it too." Garrett's expression shifted to something between shock and political calculation. Marcus didn't react at all, which meant he'd already figured out the implications and was 3 steps ahead running scenarios. "That's impossible," Garrett said. "The Reverend bloodline and the Vale bloodline have been enemies for 10 generations," Celine interrupted. "I know the history. I also know what I felt when I walked into that hall." She was still looking at Ronan. "And I know what you felt, because you left instead of staying to hear the rest of what I had to say." "I left," Ronan said carefully, Because the alternative was shifting in the middle of a summit and doing something I couldn't take back. Like killing me? Like claiming you. The words hung in the air like a thrown blade. Celine's expression didn't change, but he saw her pulse jump at the base of her throat, heard her heart rate spike just slightly. The mate bond was affecting her the same way it was affecting him, rewriting instincts, demanding attention, making it physically difficult to think clearly when they were in the same room. This changes nothing, Ronan continued, forcing the words out. The mate bond doesn't erase what your father did. Doesn't bring back the wolves who died in the Blood Moon War. Doesn't undo 10 years of... My father didn't kill yours, Celine interrupted. I know you don't believe me. I know you've spent a decade building a narrative where the Nightfang clan are the villains and you're the righteous king cleaning up the mess. But it's not true. Then prove it. I'm trying to. But I can't do that if you kill me before I have the chance. Garrett raised a hand. Perhaps we should establish some ground rules before this conversation goes any further. Alpha King Ronan, I need your word, on your father's memory, that you will honor the accord while you're under this roof. Ronan stared at him. The request was calculated. Invoking his father's memory was meant to hit the part of him that still remembered what honor meant. What justice looked like when it wasn't just revenge wearing a different mask. He wanted to refuse. Wanted to tell Garrett exactly what he could do with his accord. But the mate bond was pulling at him, and some part of his mind that still functioned despite the chaos was pointing out that if Celine had wanted him dead, she could have tried in the summit hall when he was distracted, could have had assassins waiting in the corridors, could have done any number of things that didn't involve standing in front of him requesting an alliance. You have my word, Ronan said finally. While I'm under this roof, I'll honor the accord. He paused. After that, all bets are off. Garrett nodded slowly. I'll take it. He looked at Celine. You'll be confined to the guest quarters in the eastern wing. Guards will be posted. You're not to leave without escort. Understood. And you, Garrett said, turning back to Ronan, will have quarters in the northern tower, opposite side of the fortress. I'm not interested in testing how strong that mate bond is or how well either of you can resist it. Agreed, Ronan said. They were escorted out through separate corridors. Ronan caught one last look at Celine before the Western guards took her away. She was watching him with an expression that might have been regret or might have been something else entirely. Then she was gone, and the mate bond stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Marcus waited until they were back in Ronan's quarters before speaking. This is a disaster. I'm aware. The entire summit knows. By morning, every pack in the territories will know that you and Celine Ravarin are fated mates. Marcus started pacing, which he only did when he was working through a problem with no good solutions. The political implications alone are, I know. If you reject the bond publicly, it makes you look weak. If you accept it, you're forming an alliance with the bloodline you've sworn to destroy. And if you kill her despite the bond, I'll probably go insane, Ronan finished. Rejecting a mate bond is one thing. Killing your fated mate is something else entirely. The wolf doesn't come back from that. So what's the plan? Ronan moved to the window. Outside, night had fully settled over the mountains. Stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. Somewhere in this fortress, Celine was probably standing at a similar window, feeling the same pull he was feeling, fighting the same battle between what her body wanted and what her mind knew was smart. The mate bond didn't care about smart. I'm going to find out if she's telling the truth, Ronan said. She claims someone else orchestrated the Blood Moon War. Fine. I want names. I want evidence. I want enough proof that I can look at it and know whether I spent 10 years hunting the wrong enemy. And if she can't provide that proof, then we're right back where we started. Blood debt, honor, justice. He touched the scar on his chest. The promise I made doesn't have an exception clause for mate bonds. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Your father would have wanted you to at least hear her out. My father wanted a lot of things. Peace, unity, an end to the territorial conflicts. Ronan turned from the window. He died wanting those things. So forgive me if I don't put much stock in what my father would have wanted. The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but he didn't take them back. Marcus studied him with the kind of look that said he was seeing past the Alpha King exterior to the 17-year-old kid who'd held his father while he died. You're not him, your father. You don't have to carry his dreams or his mistakes. I'm carrying his kingdom. That's enough. Later, alone in the dark, Ronan lay in a bed that felt wrong because the mate bond was insisting he should be somewhere else, and tried to think through the impossible situation he'd landed in. Fact: Celine Ravarin was his fated mate. Fact: she claimed the Nightfang clan was innocent of his father's murder. Fact: every instinct in his body wanted to protect her, while every promise he'd made demanded he destroy her. Somewhere in there was a path that didn't end with him losing his mind or his honor. He just had to find it before the mate bond or his rage made the decision for him. Sleep didn't come. Instead, he stared at the ceiling and counted the ways this could go wrong. At dawn, Marcus knocked on the door with news that made everything exponentially worse. The Southern Coalition is calling for a vote. They want Celine handed over to stand trial for the crimes of the Nightfang clan. Ronan was on his feet before Marcus finished the sentence. When? This afternoon. Garrett's trying to delay it, but 3 of the Western Alphas are siding with the Coalition. They're saying if she has evidence, she should present it now or face justice for her bloodline. They're trying to force my hand. They're testing whether you'll let the mate bond override your judgment, Marcus corrected. If you defend her, you look compromised. If you don't, I look like I'm abandoning my mate. Either way, I lose credibility. Ronan grabbed his coat. Where's the vote being held? Summit Hall, 2 hours. Get our people ready. I want 20 guards in that hall, positioned where they can respond if this turns into a fight. You think it will? I think we're one wrong word away from the whole thing exploding. The Summit Hall felt different in daylight. Less shadow, more exposure. The tiered seating was already filling with alphas, advisors, witnesses. Word had spread fast. This wasn't just a vote about Celine Ravarin. This was a referendum on whether the Accord of Neutral Ground still meant anything when faced with blood debt and mate bonds. Ronan took his seat in the highest tier, flanked by Marcus and 4 of his personal guard. Below, the speaker's circle stood empty, waiting. The Southern Coalition arrived as a unified front. 3 alphas who looked like they'd spent the night strategizing exactly how to turn this situation to their advantage. They took their seats and immediately started working the room, talking to other alphas, building the coalition that would force the vote. The Eastern Conclave entered next, looking conflicted. They'd lost wolves to Nightfang raids, but the possibility that those raids were orchestrated by someone else was clearly creating doubt. Then the Western Council, with Garrett at the lead. He looked like a man who'd slept about as well as Ronan had, which was to say, not at all. Finally, the side door opened and Celine was escorted in. The mate bond yanked at Ronan's chest the moment she appeared. He forced himself to stay seated, to keep his expression neutral, to breathe through the overwhelming urge to cross the hall and position himself between her and everyone else. She was wearing different clothes today. Still practical, still travel-worn, but cleaner. Someone had given her access to a bath in fresh water. Her hair was pulled back, exposing the line of her throat and the small Nightfang crest marked just below her left ear. The brand that had marked her for death in Ronan's mind for 10 years. Now his wolf saw it and felt only the urge to trace it with his teeth, to mark her as his, to make it clear to every alpha in this hall that she belonged to him and anyone who touched her would die screaming. He crushed that urge and focused on breathing. Garrett stood. This vote was called by the Southern Coalition. Alpha Marcos, state your position. A wolf with scars running down both sides of his face stood from the Coalition's tier. Alpha Marcos. 60 years old, veteran of 4 territorial wars, known for brutal efficiency and zero tolerance for deception. The Nightfang clan is responsible for deaths across multiple territories, Marcos said, his voice carrying across the hall without effort. Raids, assassinations, the murder of King Aldrin Vale. For 10 years we've hunted them. For 10 years they've evaded justice. He gestured at Celine. Now the last one walks into neutral ground claiming innocence, claiming conspiracy, offering no proof except her word. Murmurs of agreement rippled through portions of the hall. She's had 12 hours to provide evidence, Marcos continued. She's had multiple opportunities to name the supposed conspirators. Instead, she makes accusations without substance and expects us to simply believe her because she requests sanctuary. He paused. I call for a vote. Celine Ravarin should be remanded to the Northern Kingdom to face justice for her bloodline's crimes. All in favor? Hands went up across the hall. Not a majority, but close. Too close. Garrett looked at Celine. You have the right to respond. Celine stepped into the speaker's circle. If she was afraid, she'd buried it deep. When she spoke, her voice was steady. Alpha Marcos is correct. I've had 12 hours. 12 hours to condense 10 years of investigation into a case that will satisfy alphas who've already decided I'm guilty. She looked around the hall. My father spent his life trying to end the territorial conflicts. He believed in the treaty. He believed in peace. The night of the summit, he was prepared to sign an alliance that would have changed everything. Instead, he murdered King Aldrin, someone called out. No, Celine said firmly. He didn't, and I can prove it. The hall went silent. The night of the Blood Moon Summit, there were 37 wolves in attendance, Celine continued. 20 from the Northern Kingdom, 17 from the Nightfang clan. When the attack happened, 12 Northern wolves died. But 6 Nightfang wolves also died in that hall. She paused. Why would my father orchestrate an attack that killed his own people? Acceptable losses, Marcos said. Sacrifice a few to sell the deception. Then explain this. Celine pulled something from her coat, a folded piece of parchment. 3 weeks before the summit, my father received a letter, anonymous, warning him that someone was planning to sabotage the peace treaty, telling him to be cautious, to watch for signs of betrayal. She held up the parchment. I found this in his private study 6 months after his death. Garrett descended from his tier and took the letter. He read it, his expression darkening, then passed it to the nearest alpha. The parchment began circulating through the hall. That proves nothing, Marcos said. Anyone could have written that, including you. The ink is 10 years old, Celine shot back. Have it tested. Have the parchment dated? I don't care. But that letter was written before the summit, which means someone was planning the attack and wanted my father to know about it. Why not show the letter at the summit? An Eastern Alpha asked. Because he didn't know who to trust, Celine said. The letter didn't name names, didn't give specifics, just warned him to be careful. So he went to the summit prepared for anything. Her voice dropped. But not prepared enough. Ronan found himself leaning forward despite himself. The story had the ring of truth to it, or at least plausibility. My father died 6 months after the Blood Moon War started, Celine continued. Assassinated in his own stronghold by someone who knew our defenses, someone who had access to our security rotations, someone inside the Nightfang clan. She looked directly at Ronan. Just like someone inside the Northern Kingdom had to have helped orchestrate the attack on your father, because there's no way assassins got into that summit hall without inside help. The implications of that statement rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. You're suggesting a traitor in the Northern Court? Marcus called out. I'm suggesting traitors in multiple courts, Celine said. Someone who benefited from both our families tearing each other apart. Someone who's been operating in the shadows for a decade while we did exactly what they wanted. Marcos stood again. This is speculation, conspiracy theory. You have a letter of questionable origin and a convenient narrative that absolves your bloodline of guilt. I have more than that, Celine said. 3 months ago, I tracked down one of the wolves who participated in the Blood Moon attack. He was dying, poison, the same kind used to kill King Aldrin. She paused. Before he died, he told me the attack was coordinated by someone called the Architect, someone who paid multiple wolves from multiple clans to ensure the summit ended in blood. A deathbed confession from an unnamed source, Marcos said dismissively. Hardly compelling evidence. He gave me a name before he died, Celine continued. One of the Architect's agents. Someone currently serving in a position of power. She looked at Garrett. Someone in this fortress right now. The hall erupted. Alphas on their feet, advisors shouting, guards moving to defensive positions. Garrett's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Name them, now. Celine's eyes swept across the hall, and for a moment Ronan thought she was going to refuse. Thought she was going to keep that information to herself and use it as leverage. Then she pointed. Darius Crow, war advisor to the Northern Kingdom, former captain of King Aldrin's guard, the man who swore to protect my father's killer. She looked directly at Ronan. The man who's been your most trusted advisor for 10 years. The world stopped. Ronan felt the words hit him like a physical blow. Darius Crow. The man who'd served his father, who'd trained Ronan in strategy and combat, who'd helped him hunt down the Nightfang clan with ruthless efficiency, who'd been at the Blood Moon Summit the night his father died. The pieces started falling into place like stones down a mountainside. Darius had been the one who suggested which Nightfang targets to prioritize, who'd provided intelligence on their movements, who'd helped Ronan turn his rage into a systematic campaign of extermination, and every target had been perfectly positioned to keep the war going, to prevent any chance of reconciliation. Ronan's hand moved to his chest, to the scar he'd carved there. Every surviving Nightfang dies screaming. Who told him to make that promise? Who'd been there, in this hall, the night he'd carved those words into his own flesh? Darius Crow. Marcus grabbed Ronan's shoulder. Where is he? Good question. Ronan scanned the hall, his personal guard, the Western Wolves, the visiting Alphas. No Darius. He was supposed to be here, Marcus said quietly. I saw him this morning. He said he'd attend the vote. Find him, Ronan said, his voice coming out cold and controlled despite the rage building in his chest. Now! Marcus moved fast, taking 5 guards with him. They disappeared through the side corridors, moving to search the fortress. Below, Garrett was trying to restore order again, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with a paper dam. Celine stood in the speaker's circle, alone, having just detonated a bomb that changed everything. And she was looking at Ronan with an expression that might have been hope or might have been terror. Then the screaming started. It came from somewhere deep in the fortress. Multiple voices, the sound of fighting, steel on steel. Every Alpha in the hall went on instant alert, hands moving to weapons, bodies shifting toward defensive postures. The door Marcus had exited through slammed open. One of Ronan's guards stumbled in, bleeding from a gash across his chest. Ambush, he gasped. Eastern wing, shadow creatures, they're... He collapsed. Ronan was moving before the guard hit the floor. Down the tiers, across the hall, his wolf surging forward, demanding the shift, demanding blood. Behind him, the summit dissolved into chaos as every Alpha mobilized their forces. And somewhere in the fortress, Darius Crow was making his move. Ronan hit the eastern corridor at a dead run, Marcus and 20 guards behind him. The sounds of fighting were louder now, snarling, screaming, the wet sounds of claws through flesh. They rounded a corner and found carnage. 4 Western guards were down, throats torn out, blood pooled on stone, and standing over them were creatures that shouldn't exist. Shadow-formed wolves with eyes like burning coals, moving with coordinated precision. Not natural, not wild, controlled. One of them turned and saw Ronan. It lunged. He met it mid-leap, shifted halfway, catching it by the throat and slamming it into the wall hard enough to crack stone. The creature dissipated into smoke and shadow, leaving nothing but the smell of ash. 2 more came at him from the left. Marcus took one down with a blade through the skull. Another guard tackled the second, both of them going down in a tangle of claws and teeth. Protect the girl, someone shouted. Ronan's head snapped up, the eastern wing, where Celine was being held. The mate-bond yanked at him like a chain, and this time he didn't fight it. He ran. The guest quarters were 3 floors up. He took the stairs 4 at a time, his partially shifted form making the climb effortless. Behind him, his guards were engaging more shadow creatures, holding the line, buying him time. He hit the 3rd floor and saw the door to Celine's quarters hanging open. Inside, 2 Western guards lay dead, and Celine was gone. The mate bond pulled west, toward the mountains, toward the back of the fortress, where the old escape tunnels led into the wilderness. Ronan followed it without thinking, letting instinct override strategy, because every second that passed was another second she was in danger. The tunnels were dark and narrow, carved into the mountain itself. His wolf's vision adapted immediately, seeing in the darkness like it was daylight. He could smell Celine's scent, lavender and something sharper, like ozone before a storm, mixed with blood and fear. And another scent, familiar. Darius Crow. The tunnel opened into a ravine on the northern side of the mountain. Snow was falling again, thick and heavy. And there, 50 yards ahead, Darius had Celine by the throat, a knife pressed to the pulse point below her jaw. Ronan shifted fully back to human form and stepped into the open. Let her go. Darius smiled. He looked exactly like he always had, grizzled, competent, the kind of man you'd trust with your life. The kind of man who'd served 2 kings and trained a third. Ronan, wasn't expecting you to figure it out quite this fast. The girl's smarter than I gave her credit for. Let her go. Can't do that. See, she's the key to the whole operation. Last piece of the puzzle. Her blood opens the seal, and once that's done, he pressed the knife harder against Celine's throat. A thin line of blood appeared. Well, let's just say the Blood Moon War is going to look like a minor disagreement. The mate bond was screaming at Ronan to attack, to rip Darius apart, to eliminate the threat to his mate. But one wrong move and Darius would cut her throat before Ronan could cross the distance. Why? Ronan forced the word out. Why kill my father? Why start the war? Because your father was weak, Darius said simply. Peace with the Nightfang clan. Treaties with the southern packs. He was turning the northern kingdom into a den of soft, complacent wolves who'd forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. His expression hardened. The Obsidian Circle doesn't need peace. We need strong wolves, hard wolves, wolves forged in war and tempered by blood. The Obsidian Circle, ancient order, older than any of your bloodlines. We've been guiding the territories for centuries, culling the weak, ensuring only the strong survive. Darius shifted his grip on Celine. Your father would have destroyed that, made everyone soft, so we removed him, and framed the Nightfang clan. 2 birds, 1 stone. Your father dies, you turn into exactly the kind of king we needed, ruthless, uncompromising, focused on strength above all else. And the Nightfang bloodline gets eliminated, removing the one clan that might have interfered with our plans. He smiled. You did exactly what we wanted, Ronan. For 10 years, you were the perfect weapon. The words hit like blades. Every decision he'd made, every wolf he'd executed, every promise he'd carved into his own flesh. All of it orchestrated by the man he'd trusted most. But then she survived, Darius continued, nodding at Celine. Last daughter of the Ravaran line, carrying the blood we need to break the seal on what's buried beneath these mountains. His eyes glinted. So I'm taking her. You can try to stop me. But if you do, I cut her throat and we find another way. Ronan's mind raced, calculating angles, distance, probabilities. Darius was too far. The knife was too close to Celine's throat. One wrong move and she died. The mate bond howled inside him, demanding he act, demanding he protect her. But sometimes protection meant standing down. Take me instead, Ronan said. Darius laughed. Noble, but useless. It's her blood we need, not yours. Then you'll have to kill her because I'm not letting you walk away with her alive. You don't have a choice. There's always a choice. And Ronan made it. He shifted. Full wolf form in the space between heartbeats. Massive. White as the snow falling around them. Jaws that could crush steel. Darius moved, knife flashing toward Celine's throat. But Celine moved faster. Her elbow drove back into Darius's ribs with enough force to crack bone. His grip loosened just slightly, and she dropped her weight, slipping out of his hold. Ronan hit Darius like an avalanche. They went down in a tangle of fur and flesh and rage. The knife clattered across stone. Ronan's jaws closed on Darius's shoulder and tore, tasting blood and betrayal. Darius shifted mid-fight, brown wolf, scarred from 100 battles, experienced and vicious. They fought like the world was ending, claws and teeth and pure fury. Blood stained the snow, bones cracked. In his peripheral vision, Ronan saw Celine scrambling for the knife, saw her grab it and turn, ready to join the fight. Then shadow creatures poured out of the tunnel behind her. Dozens of them, more than should have been possible. The Obsidian Circle's reinforcements. Celine's eyes met Ronan's across the ravine. In that moment, he saw the decision she was making. No, he tried to say, but it came out as a snarl. She ran, not away from the creatures, toward them. Knife raised, no weapons, no backup. Just a woman with nothing left to lose charging into an army of shadow and teeth. And Ronan felt the exact moment his entire world realigned around a single, undeniable truth. He was going to protect her, no matter what it cost, no matter what promises he'd made. Because she was his mate, and that meant something deeper than revenge, stronger than oaths, more fundamental than the rage he'd carried for 10 years. He threw Darius off with enough force to send him sprawling, shifted back to human form, and screamed at his guards who were just reaching the tunnel entrance. Protect her. Then he dove into the fight beside Celine Ravarin, the woman he'd sworn to kill, and together they met the darkness head-on. Behind them, Darius's laughter echoed across the ravine. Too late, Ronan. The seal's already breaking. In 3 days, what's buried beneath the northern mountains will rise, and everything you've ever known will burn. He shifted again and ran, disappearing into the blizzard before Ronan could stop him. And somewhere deep beneath the frozen peaks, something ancient stirred in its prison and began to wake. The shadow creatures dissolved into smoke the moment Ronan's claws tore through them, leaving nothing but ash and the acrid smell of dark magic that shouldn't exist in the natural world. Celine was still on her feet, breathing hard, the stolen knife gripped in her hand like she actually knew how to use it. Blood streaked her face. Not hers, Ronan noted with the kind of primal satisfaction that came from knowing his mate could handle herself in a fight. The creatures she'd killed were already disappearing into the snow-covered ground, returning to whatever hell they'd been summoned from. His guards poured into the ravine, weapons drawn, forming a defensive perimeter that came about 30 seconds too late to be useful. Marcus was at the front, covered in blood that probably wasn't his, eyes scanning for threats with the kind of hypervigilance that came from surviving too many ambushes. Ronan shifted back to human form, ignoring the cold that bit at his bare skin. Shifting burned through clothing. He'd learned to accept the inconvenience. Marcus threw him a cloak without comment. Efficient, professional, the kind of beta who understood that dignity mattered even in the middle of a crisis. Darius? Marcus asked. Gone. Ronan pulled the cloak around his shoulders and stared at the tree line where his former advisor had disappeared. The blizzard was already covering his tracks, erasing evidence like the universe was deliberately making this harder. He ran west, toward the old mountains. The old mountains. Marcus's expression darkened. Where the first wars were fought, where they buried. Whatever they buried is waking up, Ronan interrupted. He said the seal is breaking. 3 days until something rises. Behind them, more guards were arriving, along with several of the Western Alphas who'd armed themselves the moment the fighting started. Garrett pushed through the crowd, looking like a man whose carefully neutral fortress had just become the staging ground for a war he didn't want. What in the frozen hell just happened? Garrett demanded. Darius Crow's Obsidian Circle, Ronan said flatly. He orchestrated the Blood Moon War. He killed my father, and now he's trying to break some kind of ancient seal that's apparently going to destroy everything we know. He gestured at the dissipating ash. Those shadow creatures are just the opening act. Garrett's jaw tightened. The Obsidian Circle. That's a myth, a story to scare young wolves. Myths don't summon shadow armies, Celine said quietly. She was still holding the knife, still positioned like she expected another attack. Smart woman. The Obsidian Circle has been real for centuries. They've been manipulating pack politics, engineering conflicts, culling bloodlines they considered weak. She looked at Ronan. Your father wasn't their first target. He was just the most recent. The words settled over the crowd like frost. One of the Southern Alphas, not Marcos, but a younger wolf named Kine, stepped forward. If what you're saying is true, if there's some ancient threat about to rise, then we need to mobilize every pack. Full military deployment, evacuation protocols for the civilian territories. We need information first, Marcus countered. We don't know what we're fighting. We don't know where the seal is. We don't even know if Darius was telling the truth or just trying to distract us while he escapes. He was telling the truth, Celine said. Every eye turned to her. She lowered the knife, finally, and met their stares without flinching. The seal is real. It's beneath the Iron Crown Mountains, in the ruins of the first pack stronghold. What's buried there? She paused, and for the first time since Ronan had met her, he saw genuine fear flicker across her face. The old stories call it the Devourer, a creature from before the packs, before the territories, before wolves learned to walk upright and call themselves civilized. Her hand moved to her chest, to the Nightfang crest marked below her ear. My bloodline wasn't cursed. We were created to be the seal's guardians. Our blood is what keeps it locked away. The implications hit Ronan like a physical blow. That's why Darius took you, he said slowly. He needs your blood to break the seal. He needs my blood to weaken it, Celine corrected. Breaking it requires a ritual, Specific timing. The eclipse ceremony is in 3 days. She looked at the assembled alphas. If he completes the ritual during the eclipse, the devourer wakes. And when it wakes, it doesn't stop until it's consumed everything in its path. Silence. Then Marcos pushed through the crowd, moving with the kind of purpose that preceded violence. You knew about this. You knew there was some ancient monster buried in the mountains, and you didn't think to mention it until now? I mentioned it in the summit hall, Celine shot back. I said someone was trying to awaken something dangerous. I said we needed to work together, but you were too busy calling for my execution to actually listen. Because you're Night Fang, Marcos snarled. Because your bloodline has been nothing but poison for generations. My bloodline has been keeping that thing locked away for generations, Celine said, her voice dropping to something cold and hard. While your packs were fighting over territory and trade routes, my family was dying to maintain a seal you didn't even know existed. She took a step forward. My father didn't kill King Aldrin, but he died trying to protect all of you from what's coming. So maybe show a little respect for the people who've been fighting this war longer than you've been alive. The tension in the ravine was thick enough to choke on. Ronan moved between them before it could escalate. We don't have time for this. Darius has a 3-day head start, and he knows exactly where he's going. We need to move, now. Garrett raised a hand. If what she's saying is true, we need to coordinate with all the packs, get reinforcements, plan a proper military response. By the time you coordinate anything, Darius will have completed the ritual, and we'll all be dead, Ronan said bluntly. I'm going after him. Anyone who wants to come with me is welcome. Anyone who wants to sit here and debate protocol can stay behind and explain to the survivors why you let the world end because you were following procedure. He turned and started walking back toward the fortress. Marcus fell into step beside him. You're really doing this. You have a better idea? Several. None of them involved charging into the Iron Crown Mountains with a skeleton crew to fight an ancient evil and a conspiracy that's been operating for centuries. Then stay here. Marcus grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around. The crowd was behind them, still arguing, still trying to process the impossible situation they'd just been handed. But Marcus's eyes were locked on Ronan's, and there was something in them that looked almost like fear. I followed you for 10 years, Marcus said quietly. Through the war, through the hunts, through every decision you made that I thought was a mistake. I've never questioned your orders in public, and I've only challenged you in private when I thought you were about to do something catastrophically stupid. He paused. This is one of those times. Noted. Ronan, listen to me. You're the Alpha King. The Northern Kingdom needs you. If you die in those mountains, the entire territory falls apart. Civil war, power vacuum, everything we've built collapses. If I don't stop Darius, there won't be a territory left to collapse, Ronan said. The Devourer doesn't care about politics or succession. It just consumes. He met Marcus's eyes. My father died because he trusted the wrong person. I'm not making that mistake. I'm not sitting here while Darius destroys everything. I'm ending this. Marcus stared at him for a long moment. Then he sighed and released Ronan's shoulder. Then I'm coming with you. Someone needs to keep you from doing something heroic and stupid. Appreciate it. They made it back to the fortress in 15 minutes. The summit had dissolved into chaos. Alphas mobilizing their forces, advisors running damage control, everyone trying to figure out if this was a real threat or an elaborate deception. The Western Guards had sealed the main gates and were checking everyone who entered for signs of shadow corruption. Ronan went straight to his quarters and started gathering supplies. Weapons. Cold weather gear. Enough provisions for a week in the mountains, even though he probably only had 3 days before everything ended. Celine appeared in the doorway without knocking. We need to talk, she said. Make it fast. I'm leaving in 20 minutes. I'm coming with you. Ronan paused in the middle of strapping a blade to his thigh. No. It's not a request. You're the key to the whole thing, Ronan said, turning to face her. Darius needs your blood to break the seal. If you come with me, you're walking straight into exactly what he wants. If I stay here, he'll send more shadow creatures to take me, Celine countered. At least if I'm with you, I'm with someone who can fight. You're staying here where it's safe. Safe! She laughed, and it sounded bitter. There's nowhere safe, not anymore. The Obsidian Circle has been operating for centuries. They have agents everywhere. Staying here just makes me a sitting target. Then I'll leave guards. A full security detail. Enough wolves to what? Die protecting me while you're in the mountains? Celine stepped into the room, closing the distance between them. I know what's at stake. I know what that creature is capable of. And I know things about the seal that you don't. Things my father told me before he died. Things that might be the difference between stopping Darius and watching the world burn. Ronan wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the most secure room in the fortress and post 50 guards outside. But the mate bond was pulling at him, insisting she stay close, insisting that separating from her was dangerous on a level his conscious mind couldn't fully understand. And there was something in her eyes, a determination that reminded him uncomfortably of himself. Fine, he said finally. But you follow orders, you stay behind me, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. She was lying. He could tell by the way her pulse didn't quite match her words, but he didn't have time to argue about it. Marcus appeared in the doorway with bad news written all over his face. We have a problem. Just one? The Northern Alphas are calling for an emergency council. They want to discuss your decision to pursue Darius. Ronan's jaw tightened. They want to discuss it. Right now. While Darius is getting away. They're saying you're compromised. That the mate bond is affecting your judgment. That you're making decisions based on emotion instead of strategy. They're not wrong, Ronan muttered. They're demanding you step down temporarily. Let someone else lead the mission while you remain here to coordinate the territories. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ronan had spent 10 years building absolute control over the Northern Kingdom. He'd crushed dissent, eliminated rivals, made it clear that his word was law. He'd turned himself into the kind of king people feared too much to challenge. And now, when it mattered most, his own alphas were trying to remove him from command. Who suggested it? Ronan asked quietly. Marcus hesitated. Theron Voss. One of Ronan's senior commanders. 45 years old, veteran of the Blood Moon War, respected by the Northern Pax for his tactical brilliance and absolute loyalty. Or what Ronan had thought was absolute loyalty. Where is he? War room, with 6 other alphas. They're waiting for you. Ronan grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Celine started to follow, but he held up a hand. Stay here. This is pack politics. It's going to get ugly. I can handle ugly. Not this kind. He left before she could argue. The war room was in the western tower, a circular chamber with a strategy table at the center and enough space for a dozen alphas to argue without killing each other. When Ronan entered, 7 northern wolves stood around the table, all of them wearing expressions that said they'd already made their decision and were just waiting to deliver it. Theron was at the head of the table. Tall, broad-shouldered, scarred from a dozen campaigns. He'd served under Ronan's father, had been one of the wolves who'd helped 17-year-old Ronan consolidate power after the Blood Moon War, had been the one who'd suggested Ronan make an example of the first Alpha who challenged his authority. Alpha King, Theron said, inclining his head with exactly the right amount of respect to be technically correct while still conveying insubordination. Thank you for joining us. Make it fast, Ronan said. I have somewhere to be. That's what we need to discuss. Theron gestured at the table. A map of the territories was spread across it, marked with positions and tactical notes. The situation with the Obsidian Circle and the supposed ancient threat. The Northern Alphas have concerns about your approach. My approach is to stop Darius before he destroys the world. What's your concern? Our concern is that you're making decisions based on the mate bond instead of strategic necessity, another Alpha said. Kyle, younger, ambitious, the kind of wolf who saw crisis as opportunity. You're planning to charge into the mountains with a skeleton crew to fight an enemy we don't understand, based on information from the daughter of the man who killed your father. The daughter of the man who was framed for killing my father, Ronan corrected. Darius admitted to orchestrating the Blood Moon War. That makes Celine Ravarin an ally, not an enemy. Convenient timing, Kael shot back. She shows up, claims innocence, and suddenly you're willing to throw away 10 years of justice because of a mate bond you didn't ask for. The mate bond has nothing to do with this, doesn't it? Theron's voice was calm, reasonable, the kind of tone that made dangerous suggestions sound sensible. You felt the bond in the summit hall. Everyone saw it. And since then, you've defended her, protected her, and now you're planning to take her with you into hostile territory where she's the exact leverage Darius needs to break the seal. I'm taking her because she has information we need. Or because you can't stand to be separated from your mate, Kyle said. Ronan's control slipped just slightly. His eyes flashed wolf gold, and every alpha in the room took a half step back. Careful, Ronan said softly. You're questioning my judgment. That's one thing. But if you're implying I'm too weak to resist a mate bond, we're going to have a different kind of conversation. Theron raised both hands in a placating gesture. No one's questioning your strength, Ronan. We're questioning your perspective. The mate bond affects judgment. It's biological, unavoidable, which is why we think it's best if you step back from this particular mission. Step back. Temporarily. Let me lead the strike force into the mountains. You stay here, coordinate the territories, prepare defenses in case we fail. Theron's expression was earnest. Concern. The perfect mask of loyal advisor worried about his king. It's the smart play, the strategic play. And in that moment, Ronan saw it. The way Theron was positioned at the head of the table, the way the other alphas deferred to him, the way he'd framed this entire conversation as concern for Ronan's well-being instead of what it actually was. A coup. Not violent, not obvious, just a slow, careful transfer of authority that would leave Ronan technically still king while Theron made all the actual decisions. How long have you been planning this? Ronan asked quietly. Theron's expression didn't change. Planning what? This. The challenge. The suggestion that I'm compromised. The convenient timing of an emergency council, right when I'm about to leave. Ronan looked at each of the alphas in turn. How long? Silence. Then Kyle spoke. Since you started losing your edge. Since you became the kind of king who hesitates instead of acts, who questions instead of commands. I'm questioning right now, Ronan said. I'm questioning why 7 of my senior alphas think they can walk into a war room and tell me how to do my job. Because your job is to protect the Northern Kingdom, Theron said. And right now, you're more interested in protecting your mate. The words hung in the air like a thrown blade. Ronan could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. These were his alphas. Wolves he'd fought beside. Wolves who'd helped him build the Northern Kingdom into the most powerful territory in the region. And they were telling him he wasn't fit to lead. The old Ronan, the one who'd spent 10 years turning himself into an instrument of absolute control, would have crushed this rebellion immediately. Would have made an example of Theron, would have reminded everyone in this room what happened when you challenged the Alpha King. But that version of Ronan had been built on a lie. On the belief that the Nightfang clan killed his father. On 10 years of rage and revenge that had been orchestrated by the man he'd trusted most. And maybe, just maybe, these alphas had a point. Maybe he was compromised. Maybe the mate bond was affecting his judgment. Maybe charging into the mountains with Celine was exactly the wrong move strategically, but it was the only move that felt right. You want me to step down, Ronan said. Temporarily, Theron emphasized. Just for this mission. Once the crisis is over, once the crisis is over, you'll have consolidated enough support to make it permanent. Ronan smiled without warmth. I've played this game before, Theron. I know how it works. This isn't a game. This is survival. You're right. It is. Ronan straightened, which is why I'm not stepping down. I'm going into those mountains. I'm stopping Darius. And when I get back, we're going to have a very long conversation about loyalty. He turned to leave. Theron's voice stopped him. If you walk out that door, you're walking out as a king without an army. The Northern Alphas won't support this mission. They won't send reinforcements. You'll be on your own. Ronan looked back. Then I'll be on my own. I've been worse odds. You'll die in those mountains. Maybe, but at least I'll die doing something that matters instead of sitting in a fortress playing politics while the world ends. He left before anyone could respond. Marcus was waiting in the corridor. I heard. The whole fortress probably heard. Let them hear. You just lost the support of your entire senior command. I lost it the moment they decided I was too compromised to lead, Ronan said. At least now we know where everyone stands. They made it back to Ronan's quarters. Celine was still there, along with 4 of Ronan's personal guard who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. We're leaving, Ronan said. Now! Whoever wants to come, pack light and move fast. We leave in 10 minutes. One of the guards, a young wolf named Eric, stepped forward. Sir, if the Northern Alphas aren't supporting this mission, they're not. Which means anyone who comes with me is doing it knowing there's no backup, no reinforcements, no rescue if things go wrong. Ronan met his eyes. I'm not ordering anyone to follow me on this, I'm asking. And I'll understand if you refuse. Eric glanced at the other guards. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. Then all four straightened. We're with you, Alpha. Something tight in Ronan's chest loosened just slightly. Get ready. We move in 10. They scattered. Celine was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You just burned every bridge you have. Not every bridge, just most of them. They're right, you know, about the mate bond affecting your judgment. I know. Then why are you doing this? Ronan turned to face her fully. Because 10 years ago, I made a promise. I carved it into my own flesh. Every surviving Night Fang dies screaming. I built my entire life around that promise. Turned myself into something hard and cold and efficient because that's what justice required. He paused. But the promise was based on a lie. My father wasn't killed by your family. He was killed by someone I trusted. Someone who used me as a weapon for 10 years while I thought I was serving justice. He touched the scar on his chest. So maybe my judgment is compromised. Maybe the mate bond is making me do things that don't make strategic sense. But for the first time in 10 years, I'm doing something because it's right instead of because it's revenge. He met her eyes. That's worth burning a few bridges. Celine was quiet for a moment. Then, your alphas are going to try to stop you, probably by force. Let them try. And if they succeed, if they lock you in this fortress while Darius completes the ritual, then you run, you get as far from here as possible, and you survive. That's not a plan. It's the only plan I have. 10 minutes later, they assembled in the courtyard. Ronan, Marcus, Celine, and 12 guards who'd decided their loyalty to their king outweighed their sense of self-preservation. 15 wolves against an ancient conspiracy and a creature that predated civilization. The odds were terrible. Ronan had faced worse. They were halfway to the gates when Theron appeared, backed by 20 northern wolves in full combat gear. I can't let you leave, Theron said. Ronan kept walking. Then stop me. I will if I have to, for your own good. My own good. Ronan stopped, turning to face his former advisor. You're really committed to this narrative, aren't you? That you're doing this to protect me, to protect the kingdom. I am protecting the kingdom. By staging a coup while an ancient evil is about to destroy everything we know. Great timing. Theron's expression hardened. You're not thinking clearly. The mate bond is the least of my problems right now, Ronan interrupted. My real problem is that I trusted you. I trusted Darius. I spent 10 years letting other people tell me who my enemies were and what justice looked like. I'm done with that. He gestured at the assembled guards. You want to stop me? Then you're going to have to fight me, right here in front of everyone. The courtyard had filled with wolves, Western guards, visiting alphas, witnesses who would carry this moment back to every territory in the region. Theron knew it. The calculation was written all over his face. If he backed down, he looked weak. If he fought, he risked starting a civil war in the middle of a crisis. For 5 long seconds, no one moved. Then Garrett stepped forward, moving between them. Enough, both of you. He looked at Theron. The accord of neutral ground is still in effect. No violence within these walls. That includes stopping an Alpha King from leaving if he chooses to do so. This is Northern Kingdom business. This is everyone's business, Garrett said firmly. If what Celine Raverin says is true, if there's some ancient threat about to wake up, then we need every capable fighter we have, including Alpha King Ronan. He looked at Ronan. You want to go into those mountains? Fine, but you're not going alone. I have my people. You have 15 wolves against the Obsidian Circle and whatever else is waiting in those ruins. Garrett gestured at the assembled crowd. I'm sending 50 of my best. The Eastern Conclave is sending 20. Even the Southern Coalition agreed to contribute forces once I explained the situation. Ronan stared at him. Why? Because Celine Ravarin was right. We've been fighting each other for generations while the real enemy operated in the shadows. If there's a chance, any chance of stopping what's coming, we take it." Garrett's expression was grim. "Besides, if you're wrong about all this, if it's a trap or a deception, better to find out now with overwhelming force than to let you walk into an ambush with a skeleton crew." It wasn't trust. It was pragmatism. But Ronan would take it. "We leave in 1 hour," he said. "Anyone who's coming, be ready." Theron's face had gone carefully blank, the kind of expression that said he was already calculating his next move. This isn't over. "No," Ronan agreed. "It's not. But it's paused. When I get back, if I get back, we'll finish this conversation." He walked past Theron without waiting for a response. An hour later, they rode out of Clearwater Hold with a force of nearly 100 wolves, the largest military deployment since the Blood Moon War. Every territory represented. Ancient rivalries set aside in the face of a threat none of them fully understood. Ronan rode at the front, Celine beside him, Marcus at his back. The Iron Crown Mountains rose in the distance like broken teeth against the sky. Snow fell in thick curtains, covering their tracks, hiding the path ahead. Somewhere in those peaks, Darius Crow was preparing a ritual that would wake something that should have stayed buried. And Ronan was riding toward it with an army of wolves who didn't trust each other, a mate he'd sworn to kill 3 days ago, and the growing certainty that he was about to lose everything he'd spent 10 years building. The old stories said the devourer couldn't be killed, only contained, only sealed away by blood and sacrifice and magic that predated the packs. Ronan touched the scar on his chest. Every surviving Nightfang dies screaming. He'd carved that promise into his own flesh, built his entire identity around it. Now he was riding into the mountains to protect the last Nightfang, to fight beside her, to maybe die for her. The cosmic irony of it would have been funny if it wasn't currently tearing him apart. Celine was watching him. He could feel her eyes even without looking. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. "That 3 days ago I wanted you dead, and now I'm leading an army to keep you alive." He glanced at her. "Funny how things change." "Is that what you want, to keep me alive?" "I don't know what I want anymore," Ronan admitted. 10 years, I knew exactly who I was, what I was fighting for, who my enemies were. He gestured at the mountains ahead. Now everything I thought I knew was a lie. The people I trusted were using me. The enemy I hunted was innocent. And the woman I swore to kill is apparently my fated mate and the only thing standing between the world and some ancient horror. "So what are you going to do?" Ronan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm going to stop Darius. I'm going to make sure that seal stays intact. And then," he paused, "then I'm going to figure out who I am when I'm not just a weapon pointed at the wrong target. That's not much of a plan. It's all I have." They rode in silence for a while. The army stretched behind them. Western wolves, Eastern fighters, even a handful of Southern warriors who'd decided the threat was real enough to risk cooperation. United by fear instead of trust, it would have to be enough. 3 hours into the journey, the first scouts reported back. Shadow creatures in the foothills, not attacking, just watching. "They're tracking us," Marcus said, "reporting our position to Darius." "Let them," Ronan said. "He knows we're coming anyway. Might as well not waste energy on stealth." By nightfall, they'd reached the edge of the Iron Crown territory. Ancient lands, forbidden by treaty since before any of them were born. The ruins of the first pack stronghold were another day's ride into the mountains, through passes that got narrower and more treacherous the higher you climbed. They made camp in a valley that provided some shelter from the wind. Fires were lit, guards were posted. Wolves from different territories eyed each other with the kind of suspicion that said this alliance was fragile at best. Ronan stood at the edge of the camp, staring up at the peaks that disappeared into cloud cover. Somewhere up there, in ruins that predated civilization, Darius was preparing to break a seal that had held for generations. 2 days until the eclipse ceremony. 2 days to find him, stop him, and prevent the end of everything. Celine appeared beside him, silent as snow. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Haven't been able to sleep properly in 10 years. Bad dreams?" "Just one. On repeat." He glanced at her. "My father dying, every night, Same memory, same helplessness. Does it get easier? No, you just get used to it. She was quiet for a moment, then, for what it's worth, I dream about my father too. The night he was killed. I was in the next room. I heard the fighting. By the time I got there, she stopped. Ronan didn't push. He understood that kind of grief, the kind that came from being close enough to help, but too late to matter. Darius orchestrated both, he said quietly. Your father, mine. He probably stood there and watched them die and felt nothing. He felt satisfaction, Celine corrected. He felt like he was serving some greater purpose. The Obsidian Circle doesn't see individuals. They see bloodlines, territories, power structures. People are just pieces on a board. Then we're going to knock over the board. With what? 100 wolves who barely trust each other? Against an organization that's been operating for centuries? You have a better idea? Run, Celine said. Get as far from here as possible. Let Darius complete his ritual. Let the Devourer wake, and hope we can survive what comes after. Ronan looked at her. You don't actually believe that. No, but it would be the smart play. She smiled, and it was bitter. Seems like neither of us is very good at making smart plays. We could be. We could turn around right now. Take the army back to Clearwater Hold, fortify the territories, prepare defenses. But you're not going to do that. No. Why not? Ronan was silent for a long moment, watching the firelight dance across the camp, 100 wolves preparing for a battle they might not survive. Alphas who'd been enemies 3 days ago now sharing supplies and coordinating strategy. Because I'm tired of running, he said finally. Tired of letting fear dictate my decisions. Tired of being the kind of king who reacts instead of acts. He looked at her. Darius used me for 10 years, turned me into exactly the kind of ruler the Obsidian Circle wanted, hard, uncompromising, focused on strength over mercy. I'm done being his weapon. So what are you going to be instead? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out after I put a blade through his throat. Celine's expression shifted to something that might have been approval or might have been understanding. For what it's worth, I think your father would have been proud of you. My father's dead because he believed in second chances. And you're alive because you learned from his mistakes, Celine countered. There's a difference between mercy and weakness, between trust and naivety. Your father understood that. I think you're starting to understand it too. Before Ronan could respond, Marcus appeared, moving fast. We have a problem. The scouts found something. They followed him to the northern edge of camp, where 3 scouts were standing over something in the snow. As Ronan got closer, he saw what had them spooked. A body, or what was left of one. The wolf had been torn apart, but not by claws or teeth. Something else. Something that had left burn marks and shadow residue across the corpse. One of ours? Ronan asked. Western Guard, Marcus confirmed. Part of the advanced scout team. The others are missing. Ronan crouched beside the body, studying the wounds. The damage pattern was wrong, too precise, too controlled. This wasn't shadow creatures, he said quietly. This was a message. From Darius? From the Obsidian Circle. They're telling us to turn back. They're telling us what happens if we don't. Celine was examining the burn marks, her expression grim. These wounds, I've seen them before. In the old records. This is what happens when someone tries to resist the Devourer's influence. The seal's already breaking, Marcus said. The seal's been breaking for months, Celine corrected. Slowly, carefully. Darius has been preparing for this. The eclipse ceremony is just the final step. Ronan stood. Then we don't have 2 days. We have hours. They broke camp immediately. The army moved through the mountain passes in forced march formation, sacrificing stealth for speed. Wolves who'd been resting were roused. Supplies were abandoned. Everything that wasn't essential was left behind. They had to reach the ruins before Darius completed the ritual. The higher they climbed, the worse it got. More bodies, more shadow residue, evidence of fighting that had happened recently, maybe hours ago. And then they found the advanced scouts, all 12 of them, arranged in a circle, throats cut. Blood used to paint symbols on the ground that made Ronan's wolf recoil just looking at them. He's using them for the ritual, Celine said, her voice shaking. He's using their blood to speed up the process. How long do we have? I don't know, hours, maybe less. They pushed harder. The path became treacherous. Narrow ledges, sheer drops, wind that threatened to tear them off the mountain. Wolves fell. Injuries mounted. The army that had left Clearwater Hold with 100 strong was down to maybe 80 by the time they reached the final approach to the ruins. And that's when Ronan saw it. The first stronghold, a massive structure carved directly into the mountainside, half collapsed, covered in ice and snow and the weight of centuries. Architecture that predated modern packs, symbols etched into stone that hurt to look at. And at the center, in what had once been a grand hall, light pulsed with a rhythm that matched a heartbeat. The seal. Ronan could feel it from here. Ancient magic, weakening, cracking under pressure. It was never meant to withstand for this long. "We're too late," someone whispered. "We're not too late until it's over," Ronan said. He turned to the assembled wolves, exhausted, bloodied, barely holding together. His army. "Darius Crow is in those ruins. He's trying to break a seal that's the only thing standing between us and extinction. He's using blood magic and shadow creatures and 10 years of careful manipulation to do it." Ronan's voice carried across the assembly. "I know you didn't sign up for this. I know most of you were enemies 3 days ago. I know you have every reason to turn around and let someone else handle this." He paused. "But if we turn around now, there won't be anyone else. There won't be territories to go back to. There won't be pacts or politics or any of the things we've spent generations fighting over." He met the eyes of wolves from every territory. "There will just be the devourer and everything it consumes." Silence. Then Garrett stepped forward. "We're with you, Alpha King." Kane from the Southern Coalition. "We're with you." One by one, the Alphas signaled their commitment, not because they trusted Ronan, not because they believed in him, but because the alternative was unthinkable. "We go in fast," Ronan said. "No formation, no coordination. Just hit them with everything we have and don't stop until Darius is dead, or we are." He looked at Marcus. "You're in command if I fall." "You're not going to fall. If I do, you finish this, no matter what it costs." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Ronan turned to Celine. "You stay back. You're the one thing Darius needs. Don't give him the chance to take you." "I'm not hiding while everyone else fights." "You're the Seal Guardian. Your blood is what's keeping that thing contained. If you die, it doesn't matter if we stop Darius." She wanted to argue. He could see it in her eyes, but she also knew he was right. "Be careful," she said quietly. "Careful's not really my style." Then he shifted. The transformation took seconds. Bone and muscle reshaping, fur sprouting, senses sharpening to wolf clarity. Around him, 80 others did the same, and together they charged into the ruins of the first stronghold like an avalanche of fur and fury and desperate hope. The shadow creatures met them at the entrance, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, pouring out of the ruins like smoke given form and purpose. The battle was immediate and brutal. Ronan tore through them, his jaws crushing shadow flesh, his claws rending unnatural forms. Beside him, Marcus fought with the precision of a soldier who'd survived too many wars to die to magic. Behind them, the combined packs fought like they'd been training together for years instead of days. Blood stained the snow. Ash filled the air. They pushed deeper into the ruins. And then Ronan saw him, Darius Crow. Standing in the center of the ancient hall, surrounded by a circle of bodies. His hands were stained red. His eyes glowed with power that shouldn't exist. And beneath him, carved into the floor, the seal was cracking. Light poured through the fractures. Not natural light. Something older. Hungrier. Ronan shifted back to human form and walked forward, stepping over bodies, ignoring the shadow creatures that parted around him like he was carrying his own invisible barrier. "Ronan," Darius said, smiling. "Right on time." "It's over, Darius. Step away from the seal." "Or what? You'll kill me?" Darius laughed. "You're too late. The ritual's nearly complete. In minutes, the devourer wakes. And when it does, everything you've ever known ends. Then I'll have minutes to stop you. You can't stop this. No one can. The Obsidian Circle has been planning this for generations. Your father tried to interfere. He died. Aldrich Raverin tried to interfere. He died. And now you're going to die too." Darius gestured at the cracking seal. "The age of weak kings is over. The age of the devourer begins." Ronan took another step forward, and that's when he saw it. Behind Darius, in the shadows, Theron, his former advisor, his trusted commander, standing among the Obsidian Circle operatives with an expression that said this wasn't a surprise. The betrayal hit harder than any physical blow. "You," Ronan said quietly. Theron stepped into the light. "Me." "How long?" "Since the beginning. Since before your father died. The Obsidian Circle has been guiding the Northern Kingdom for decades. Your father, you, all of us." Theron's expression was almost pitying. "You thought you were building something, but you were just following the script we wrote." Everything Ronan had built, every decision, every promise, all of it orchestrated by the people he'd trusted most. The rage that filled him then was pure, absolute, the kind that burned away everything else. He shifted and lunged. But Darius was faster. The magic hit Ronan mid-leap, slamming him into the ground hard enough to crack stone. Pain exploded through his body. His wolf form flickered, unstable, fighting the unnatural power trying to force him back to human. "I told you," Darius said. "You're too late." Behind him, the seal shattered, and something ancient opened its eyes beneath the mountain. The thing that rose from beneath the shattered seal wasn't a creature in any sense that mattered to wolves who'd spent their lives understanding the natural order of predator and prey. It was hunger-given form. Ronan felt it before he saw it, a pressure in his chest like the air itself was being consumed, like gravity had reversed and was trying to pull him down into the fractured floor where ancient stone had given way to darkness that moved with terrible purpose. His wolf recoiled inside him, every instinct screaming to run, to flee, to put as much distance as possible between himself and whatever was clawing its way out of a prison that had held for centuries. But running wasn't an option because Selene was behind him and the mate bond was stronger than survival instinct. That realization hit him like cold water. 10 years he'd spent training himself to prioritize mission over emotion, strategy over sentiment. 10 years of turning himself into a weapon that didn't hesitate, didn't question, didn't feel anything except the cold satisfaction of eliminating threats. And now, faced with the end of everything, the only thing his body cared about was protecting one person. The Devourer emerged slowly, deliberately, like it had all the time in the world because once it was free, time would belong to it anyway. The form kept shifting, sometimes massive and serpentine, sometimes vaguely humanoid, sometimes just shadow and teeth, and the kind of wrongness that made Ronan's vision blur just trying to focus on it. Ancient magic poured off it in waves, corrupting the air, turning snow to ash, making the stone beneath their feet groan like the mountain itself was trying to escape. Around them, the battle had stopped. Every wolf, northern, western, eastern, southern, was frozen in place, staring at the thing that had just invalidated every territorial dispute, every political conflict, every reason they'd spent generations fighting each other. Because none of that mattered when you were standing in front of something that viewed entire civilizations as food. Darius was laughing. The sound echoed across the ruined hall, high and manic and victorious. Blood covered his hands and arms, ritual markings carved into his own flesh still smoking from whatever magic he'd used to break the seal. "Finally," he said, his voice carrying the kind of religious fervor that came from absolute belief. "The age of weak kings ends. The age of strength begins. The Obsidian Circle has delivered salvation." Theron stood beside him, expression carefully neutral, which told Ronan more than any words could. His former advisor wasn't celebrating, wasn't gloating. He was watching, calculating, already 3 steps ahead planning whatever came next. That terrified Ronan more than the Devourer did, because the Devourer was a force of nature, destructive, unstoppable, but ultimately simple in its purpose. Consume, grow, destroy. But Theron was something worse. He was intelligent, patient, the kind of enemy who'd spent years positioning pieces on a board, waiting for exactly this moment. The Devourer's attention swept across the hall, and Ronan felt the weight of its regard like a physical thing. Ancient, alien, utterly indifferent to the concept of mercy or negotiation or any of the things that made wolves different from animals. Then it spoke. The sound wasn't words in any language Ronan understood. It was deeper than that, older. It bypassed ears and went straight into the mind, carving meaning into consciousness like someone etching commands into stone. Hunger, freedom, consumption. Every wolf in the hall staggered. Some collapsed outright, blood streaming from their ears. The weaker ones, the younger fighters, the ones who hadn't developed the kind of mental fortitude that came from surviving trauma, started screaming. Ronan stayed on his feet through sheer stubbornness, and the fact that he'd spent 10 years building walls in his mind that even he couldn't break through easily. But it hurt. Every syllable of that not voice felt like claws scraping against the inside of his skull. Behind him, Marcus was shouting orders, trying to organize a retreat, trying to save what could be saved. Good man, loyal to the end. But there was nowhere to retreat to. The Devourer was between them and the exit, and running just meant dying tired. Celine pushed through the crowd, moving toward Ronan with the kind of determination that said she'd made a decision and consequences didn't matter anymore. "Don't," Ronan said without turning around. The mate bond told him exactly where she was, told him her heart was racing, told him she was terrified but refusing to show it. "My bloodline created the seal," Celine said. "My blood can reinforce it. Your blood is what Darius used to break it. Then maybe my blood can fix it." "That's not a plan. That's suicide." "You have a better idea?" Ronan didn't. That was the problem. The Devourer was still emerging, pulling itself out of the earth like something being born in reverse. The corruption was spreading, stone turning to ash, air turning toxic, reality itself warping around the creature like space couldn't quite contain what shouldn't exist in the first place. They had minutes, maybe less. Ronan's mind raced through scenarios, tactics, anything that might give them an edge. But every option ended the same way. They weren't equipped for this. You couldn't fight something that existed outside the natural order with claws and teeth and determination. You needed magic, ancient magic, the kind that had created the seal in the first place. And the only person here who carried that magic in their blood was standing right behind him. "No," Ronan said flatly. "It's not your decision." "Like hell it's not. You're my mate. That makes it my decision." "Since when do you care about the mate bond?" Celine shot back. 3 days ago you wanted me dead. 2 days ago you could barely stand to be in the same room as me. Now suddenly you're making decisions about my life?" Yes, the honesty of it surprised even him. But it was true. Somewhere between the summit hall and this frozen hell, the mate bond had stopped being an inconvenience and started being the only thing that made sense in a world built on lies. Celine's expression shifted to something between frustration and understanding. "I'm going to die anyway. We're all going to die. At least let me die doing something that matters." "No one's dying," Ronan said. "Not you, not Marcus, not any of these wolves who followed me into this nightmare." He turned to face her fully. "I made a promise 10 years ago, carved it into my own flesh. Every surviving Nightfang dies screaming. I built my whole life around that promise." "I know. I was wrong." The words came out rough, forced through a throat that didn't want to say them. "The promise was based on a lie. My father's death. Your father's guilt. Everything I believed was orchestrated by people I trusted." He gestured at Theron, at Darius, at the corruption spreading across the hall. "So I'm making a new promise. You don't die here. Not for this. Not for me. Not for any of it. That's not a promise you can keep. Watch me." Before she could respond, the Devourer's attention locked onto her. The shift was immediate and terrifying. The creature's form solidified slightly, becoming more coherent, more focused. Its not voice filled the hall again. Blood, seal, guardian. It knew what she was, recognized her bloodline, and wanted her specifically. Darius saw it too. His expression shifted from manic victory to calculation. The guardian bloodline. Of course. Kill her and the seal can never be restored. He looked at Theron. "Take her." Theron moved fast, shifting mid-step, his wolf form larger than it should have been. Enhanced, modified. Whatever the obsidian circle had done to him, it had made him faster, stronger, more dangerous than any natural wolf had a right to be. He hit Ronan like a freight train. They went down in a tangle of claws and teeth and rage that had been building since the moment Ronan discovered the betrayal. This wasn't a strategic fight. This was personal, vicious. The kind of violence that came from trust turned to poison. Ronan's jaws closed on Theron's shoulder and tore. Blood filled his mouth. Theron's claws raked across Ronan's ribs, opening wounds that burned with unnatural heat. Around them, the other wolves were engaging. Ronan caught glimpses through the chaos, Marcus leading a charge against the shadow creatures, Garrett coordinating defensive positions, the Southern Coalition holding a line that kept collapsing and reforming. But it wasn't enough. The Devourer was still emerging, still growing, and for every shadow creature they killed, 2 more formed from the corruption spreading across the floor. They were losing. Ronan threw Theron off with enough force to crack stone, shifted back to human form, and grabbed the blade from his belt. Silver. Blessed. The kind of weapon that worked on supernatural threats. Theron shifted back too, circling, blood dripping from his shoulder but moving like it didn't hurt. You can't win this, Ronan. The Obsidian Circle has been planning this for generations. Every move calculated, every contingency prepared for. Then you didn't prepare for me being too stubborn to die. Stubbornness isn't strategy. It is when you've got nothing else. They clashed again, blade against claws, human against wolf. Ronan fought with the kind of desperate precision that came from knowing this was the only thing standing between Selene and whatever Theron had planned for her. And slowly, painfully, he started to understand something. All those years Theron had spent training him, advising him, shaping him into the perfect weapon. It hadn't been about making Ronan strong. It had been about making him predictable, about ensuring his rage could be pointed in the right direction, his violence controlled and channeled exactly where the Obsidian Circle wanted it. But rage wasn't the only weapon Ronan had. He had spent 10 years learning to fight without thinking, to react without hesitation, to turn himself into pure, efficient violence. But before that, before the Blood Moon War, before his father's death, he'd been something else. A boy who'd studied strategy, who'd learned that sometimes the best way to win wasn't through overwhelming force, but through finding the weakness in your enemy's plan. And Theron's weakness was arrogance. He'd spent so long controlling Ronan that he'd stopped seeing him as a threat, started seeing him as a tool, a weapon that could be disarmed and redirected at will. Ronan let Theron see what he expected: rage, desperation, the same patterns he'd been using for 10 years. Then he changed the pattern. Instead of meeting Theron's next attack head-on, Ronan sidestepped, using the momentum to spin and drive his blade up under Theron's ribs, angling for the heart. The shock on Theron's face was worth every second of pain it had cost to get there. Adaptability, Ronan said quietly. My father tried to teach me that, said the best leaders were the ones who could change strategies mid-battle. I didn't listen. Too focused on being strong, being unchanging, being the kind of king who never bent. He twisted the blade. Thanks for reminding me what flexibility looks like. Theron collapsed, blood spreading across the ancient stone, his wolf form flickering between human and beast like his body couldn't decide which form to die in. The circle, he gasped. Won't stop. More agents, more plans. You've won nothing. I've won this, Ronan said. That's enough for now. He pulled the blade free and turned back to the real threat. The Devourer had fully emerged. It towered over the hall, massive and impossible, a creature that shouldn't fit in any space this small but somehow occupied every corner simultaneously. The corruption had spread across half the floor, turning stone to something organic and wrong, pulsing with the creature's heartbeat. Darius stood before it like a priest before a god, arms raised, still chanting in a language that predated wolves, still channeling whatever power had broken the seal. And Selene was running toward him with a blade in one hand and absolute determination in her eyes. Ronan's heart stopped. The mate bond screamed at him to move, to intercept her, to stop her from doing whatever insane plan she'd concocted. But he was too far away. And she was too fast. Selene hit Darius like a comet, the blade flashing, aimed for his throat. Darius turned at the last second and caught her wrist. Magic flared. Selene screamed. Ronan ran. He covered the distance in seconds that felt like hours, shifted mid-stride, hit Darius with enough force to break bones. They went down together, rolling across corrupted stone that burned like acid. Ronan's jaws closed on Darius's throat and tore. Blood poured across the floor, hot, copper, human and wrong at the same time, because Darius had been channeling too much magic for too long, and it had changed him into something that wasn't quite natural anymore. But he died like anything with a throat could die. Choking, gasping, eyes going wide with the realization that immortality was a lie, and betrayal was its own reward. The Devourer's roar shook the mountain. The sound was physical. Ronan felt it in his bones, felt the air compress and expand like the creature was trying to unmake reality through sheer volume. Then the Devourer moved. Fast. Too fast. 1 second it was across the hall, the next it was right there, massive and terrible, reaching for Celine with appendages that shifted between claws and tentacles and pure shadow. Ronan threw himself between them. The impact was like being hit by a collapsing building. Pain exploded through his body. Ribs cracked. Something in his spine shifted wrong. His vision went white, then red, then black. But he stayed on his feet, because the alternative was watching his mate die. And that wasn't an option his body would accept. The Devourer's not voice filled his mind again. Obstacle, remove, consume. Come on then, Ronan snarled through a mouthful of blood. Let's see if ancient nightmares bleed. It hit him again and again. Each impact drove him backward, closer to where Celine was struggling to her feet, blood streaming from the burns where Darius's magic had marked her. Ronan's vision was fading. His wolf was screaming at him to retreat, to heal, to save himself. But retreat meant leaving Celine exposed, and that was the one thing he couldn't do. The realization settled over him with the weight of absolute truth. 10 years he'd spent building walls around himself, turning into something that didn't need anyone, didn't trust anyone, didn't love anyone. And in 3 days, one woman had torn all of that down and reminded him what it felt like to have something worth protecting that wasn't just pride or power or revenge. The mate bond wasn't a weakness. It was the only honest thing in his life. "Ronan," Celine's voice cut through the pain. "Move! Let me through." "No. You're going to die." "Then I die here." He shifted back to human form despite the agony it caused, stood on legs that barely supported his weight, and looked back at her. Blood ran down his face, his chest. Bones were broken in places he didn't want to count. But he was standing. "My father believed in sacrifice," Ronan said. "Believed in giving up everything for the people he protected. I thought that made him weak. Thought strength meant never surrendering, never compromising, never putting anyone above yourself." He smiled through broken teeth. "Turns out he was stronger than I ever was." "Don't you dare," Celine said, and her voice was shaking. "Don't you dare make this about some grand sacrifice. Don't you dare die because you finally figured out what love looks like." "Not planning to die," Ronan said. "Planning to buy you time. There's a difference." The Devourer was gathering itself for another attack. The corruption was spreading faster now, consuming the hall, reaching for them with tendrils that dissolved anything they touched. Behind Ronan, Celine was doing something. He could feel magic building, could feel her blood responding to whatever ancient power her bloodline carried. "How long do you need?" he called back. 2 minutes? Maybe less." "You've got it." The Devourer struck. Ronan met it head-on, shifted, let his wolf take over and fight with the kind of primal fury that came from knowing this was the end. Claws tore through shadow flesh. Teeth found purchase on things that shouldn't have substance. And slowly, painfully, impossibly, Ronan started to understand the creature's pattern. It was ancient, powerful. But it had been sealed for generations, weakened, diminished. It could be hurt. More importantly, it could be slowed. Ronan threw himself into the fight with everything he had. Every technique Theron had taught him. Every brutal lesson learned in 10 years of war. Every ounce of rage and love and desperate hope that if he could just hold on long enough, Celine would figure out how to stop this. The Devourer's attacks came faster, harder. Ronan felt bones break and reform, felt claws tear through muscle and organs, felt his wolf's healing factor struggling to keep up with damage that should have killed him 3 times over. But he stayed on his feet, because behind him, Celine was chanting. Her voice rose above the chaos, speaking words in the old tongue, the language of sealmakers and guardian bloodlines. Light poured from her hands, pure, clean, the opposite of the corruption spreading through the hall. The Devourer felt it, recognized the threat. It tried to get past Ronan, tried to reach her, eliminate the only thing that could seal it away again. Ronan wouldn't let it. Every time the creature tried to move around him, he intercepted. Every time it focused on Celine, he drew its attention back with violence and blood and absolute refusal to surrender. And slowly, agonizingly, the light from Celine's magic began to push back the corruption. The devourer roared again. This time the sound carried frustration, anger, the first hint of something that might have been fear. "Almost there," Celine shouted. "Just a little longer." Ronan didn't have a little longer. His body was failing. The healing factor had reached its limit. The next hit would be the one that put him down permanently, but he had seconds. That would have to be enough. The devourer's next attack came from 3 directions simultaneously: claws from above, tendrils from below, shadow flesh from the side. No way to block all of it. Ronan chose. He let the claws hit his side, let the tendrils wrap around his legs, and focused everything he had on stopping the shadow flesh from reaching Celine. His jaws closed on corruption that burned like acid. His claws dug into darkness that tried to dissolve him from the inside out. And he held on. Pain beyond anything he'd ever experienced tore through him. His wolf howled inside his mind, begging him to let go, to save himself, to run. But running meant Celine died. And he'd made a promise. The light from Celine's magic suddenly intensified. Bright, blinding, pure. Ronan felt it wash over him, felt the corruption burning away from his body, felt something ancient and right pushing back against something ancient and wrong. The seal was reforming. The devourer screamed, not a roar this time, an actual scream, high-pitched, desperate, the sound of something that had tasted freedom and was watching it slip away. Ronan released his grip and fell, his body finally giving up, vision going dark. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness took him was Celine standing over the reforming seal, blood streaming from her hands and face, light pouring from her like she was burning from the inside out. Beautiful, terrifying, everything he'd never known he needed, and then everything went black. When consciousness returned, it came slowly, painfully. Like waking up after being dead, Ronan opened his eyes and found himself staring at a ceiling carved from ancient stone. The ruins of the first stronghold. Still here, still alive somehow. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through every part of his body, sharp and immediate and completely undeniable. "Don't move." Marcus's voice, tired, relieved. "You've been out for 6 hours. Your body's still healing." Ronan turned his head, slowly, carefully, and found his beta sitting against a nearby wall. Bloodied, exhausted, but alive. "Celine?" Ronan's voice came out as a rasp. "She's alive, unconscious. Whatever she did to restore the seal nearly killed her." Marcus gestured to the far side of the chamber. "She's over there, guarded by every wolf who can still stand." Ronan forced himself upright despite the agony it caused. Across the chamber, he could see Celine lying on a makeshift bed of cloaks and supplies. Pale, still, but breathing. The mate bond pulsed weakly in his chest. She was weak but alive. That was enough. "The devourer?" Ronan asked. "Sealed. For now. Whatever Celine did, it's holding, but..." Marcus hesitated. "She said the seal won't last forever. A few years. Maybe a decade if we're lucky. Eventually, it'll weaken again. Then we have a decade to figure out a permanent solution." "Assuming we survive the next few days," Marcus said grimly. "The Obsidian Circle's not going to take this well. We killed 2 of their agents, stopped their grand plan, and exposed their existence to every major pack in the territories." "Good. Let them come. I'm done running from shadows." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then, "What happened to you in this hall? You fought like a man who had nothing left to lose." "I fought like a man who finally figured out what he had to lose," Ronan corrected. He looked at Celine's unconscious form across the chamber. 10 years I spent being the kind of king who didn't need anyone. Turns out that's not strength. That's just isolation." "Your father used to say something similar." "My father was right about a lot of things. Took me 10 years to figure it out." Around them, the surviving wolves were regrouping, maybe 60 left out of the 100 who'd entered these ruins. The casualties were heavy, but they'd won. Barely. Garrett approached, limping, one arm in a makeshift sling. "We need to move. The mountain's unstable. All that magic damaged the foundations. This whole structure could collapse within hours." "Can we move her?" Ronan nodded at Celine. "We'll have to. The alternative is staying here and dying when the ceiling comes down." Ronan forced himself to his feet. His body screamed in protest but obeyed. He crossed the chamber to where Celine lay, every step an exercise in willpower over pain. She looked smaller somehow, fragile. The woman who'd stood in the speaker's circle and accused the most powerful alphas in the territories of blindness. The woman who'd run toward an ancient evil with nothing but a blade and determination. His mate. The thought still felt strange, foreign, but also right in a way nothing else had for 10 years. He knelt beside her, slowly, carefully, and touched her face. Cold. Too cold. The mate bond pulled at him, demanding he do something. Fix this, make her warm again. She needs medical attention, he said. We all do, Garrett replied. But we need to get out of these ruins first. Ronan stood and addressed the assembled wolves. 60 survivors, multiple packs, enemies who'd become allies out of necessity. Listen up, we're moving out in 10 minutes. Anyone who can walk carries someone who can't. No one gets left behind. We fought together, we bleed together, we survive together. He paused. The Obsidian Circle wanted us divided, wanted us weak, wanted us too busy fighting each other to notice them pulling strings in the shadows. He looked at each of them in turn, northern, western, eastern, southern. They failed, because we chose to stand together. That choice saved the world today. And it's the choice we're going to keep making tomorrow and every day after until the Obsidian Circle is nothing but a bad memory. Silence. Then one by one, the wolves signaled agreement. Not enthusiastic, not unified, but committed enough to matter. It would have to be enough. They evacuated the ruins in organized chaos, Marcus coordinating the retreat, Garrett and the Western Alphas handling the rear guard, Ronan carrying Celine himself, refusing to let anyone else touch her despite the fact that his body was barely functional. The mountain groaned behind them, stone cracking, ancient magic failing. The first stronghold that had stood for centuries finally succumbing to the damage of what they'd done to save it. They made it out just as the collapse began. Tons of rock and ice cascading down, burying the ruins, sealing the Devourer's prison under an avalanche that would take years to clear. Temporary, unstable, but holding. Ronan laid Celine down in the snow outside the ruins and finally allowed himself to collapse beside her. The sun was rising over the eastern peaks, first light cutting through the clouds. Beautiful, clean, alive. They'd survived the night. That was enough. Marcus appeared above him, blocking the sun. Medical team setting up. We need to get both of you looked at. In a minute. Ronan. In a minute, Ronan repeated. I just need a minute. Marcus nodded and withdrew, leaving them alone in the snow. Ronan turned his head to look at Celine. She was still unconscious, still too pale. But the mate bond was stronger now, steadier. She was healing. You're incredibly stupid, he said quietly. Running at Darius like that. No backup, no plan, just faith that somehow it would work out. She didn't respond. Unconscious people rarely did. But you were right. It worked. The seals restored, the Devourers contained. We're alive. He paused. I spent 10 years building walls around myself, turning into something that didn't need anyone. And you tore all of that down in 3 days. Still no response. Just the sound of her breathing. Steady. Alive. When you wake up, Ronan continued, we're going to have a conversation about the mate bond, about what happens next, about whether you can forgive me for spending 10 years trying to kill your entire bloodline based on a lie. The sun climbed higher. Warmth touched his face for the first time in what felt like forever. But until then, he said, I'm just going to lie here and pretend the world isn't about to get a lot more complicated. Behind them, the Northern Kingdom's political structure was probably falling apart. Theron's betrayal would create a power vacuum. The other alphas would move to fill it. Challenges would come, conflicts would arise. The Obsidian Circle was still out there, wounded, exposed, but not destroyed. And Celine's bloodline was the only thing standing between the world and an ancient evil that would eventually break free again. But all of that was tomorrow's problem. Today, they were alive. Ronan closed his eyes and let himself feel the sun on his face, the mate bond steady in his chest, and the absolute certainty that whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. For the first time in 10 years, that didn't feel like weakness. It felt like strength. Celine woke 3 days after the seal was restored, and the first thing she did was try to kill Ronan. Not intentionally, not consciously, But her body reacted to proximity the way traumatized things do, with violence first, questions later. Her hand went for the blade that wasn't there anymore. Her wolf surged forward, ready to shift, and her eyes opened with the kind of wild panic that came from waking up in an unfamiliar place surrounded by the scent of blood and smoke and magic gone wrong. Ronan caught her wrist before the phantom blade could materialize, his grip gentle, despite the strength behind it, and said the only thing that mattered. "You're safe. It's over. We won." The words took a moment to penetrate. Celine's breathing was ragged, her pulse hammering against his fingers where they circled her wrist. Then recognition flickered across her face, first of him, then of the medical tent they were in, then of the memory of what she'd done in those ruins. "The seal," she gasped. "Holding. You did it. The devourer. Contained. Sleeping. Whatever you did, it worked." She collapsed back against the cot, the fight draining out of her like water from a broken cup. For a long moment, she just lay there, staring at the tent ceiling, processing the fact that she was alive when everything in her body said she should be dead. Ronan released her wrist and sat back in the chair he'd been occupying for the past 72 hours. Marcus had tried multiple times to make him leave, to rest, to let someone else watch over her. But the mate bond wouldn't let him stray more than a few feet without his wolf clawing at his insides, demanding he return to protect what was his. Celine finally looked at him, really looked. Her eyes cataloged the bandages, the healing wounds, the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "You look terrible," she said. "You look worse." It was true. Her hands were wrapped in gauze where the seal magic had burned through skin and muscle. Her face was pale enough to make the dark circles under her eyes stand out like bruises. She'd lost weight in 3 days that she couldn't afford to lose. But she was alive. That was all that mattered. "How many did we lose?" Celine asked quietly. 43. Another dozen won't make it through the week." The number sat heavy in Ronan's chest. Names, faces, wolves who'd followed him into hell because he'd asked and died because he hadn't been fast enough, strong enough, smart enough to save them all. Leadership meant carrying those deaths, meant remembering each one, meant accepting that the price of victory was paid in blood that wasn't yours. His father had understood that, had carried the weight of every wolf lost under his command. Ronan had thought it made him weak, made him hesitate when decisiveness was needed. Now he understood it was the only thing that kept you human when the world demanded you become something harder. "I'm sorry," Celine said. "Don't be. They chose to fight, chose to stand against something that should have killed us all. That choice matters more than the outcome." "Does it?" "Tell that to the families who lost someone." "I will, personally, every single one." Ronan met her eyes. "That's what kings do. They face the consequences of their decisions. They carry the weight so others don't have to." Celine studied him for a long moment. "You're different. Since the ruins, something changed." Everything changed. A healer entered, one of the Western Pact's medical staff, a woman named Kara, who'd been dealing with supernatural injuries for longer than Ronan had been alive. She checked Celine's vital signs with practiced efficiency, asked questions about pain levels and sensation in her extremities, then declared her stable enough to stay conscious, but not stable enough to leave the cot. When they were alone again, Celine spoke carefully. "The mate bond. We need to talk about it." "I know, because I can feel it. Every time you're close, every time you move away. It's like someone tied a cord between us and I can't cut it no matter how hard I try." "I know," Ronan repeated. "I feel it too. And 3 days ago you wanted me dead." 3 days ago I wanted a lot of things. Most of them were based on lies fed to me by people I trusted. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. "I spent 10 years building my entire identity around destroying your bloodline. Carved a promise into my own flesh. Turned myself into a weapon aimed at the wrong target." He paused. "The mate bond doesn't erase that, doesn't make it okay. Doesn't mean you should forgive me or accept this, or do anything except tell me to walk away and never come back." "Is that what you want? To walk away?" "No, but what I want doesn't matter. You get to choose. The mate bond is biological, undeniable, but choice is what makes us more than animals." He met her eyes. "So choose. I'll honor whatever you decide." Celine was quiet for a long time. Outside the tent, the sounds of camp filtered through. Wolves recovering, supplies being organized, low conversations about what came next. The combined packs had set up a temporary base in the foothills below the Iron Crown Mountains. Far enough from the ruins to be safe, close enough to monitor the seal. The political implications of 4 territories camping together were enormous, but exhaustion and shared trauma had temporarily overridden the usual territorial instincts. It wouldn't last. Ronan knew that. Within a week, maybe less, the old conflicts would resurface. Alphas would start positioning for advantage. The fragile alliance would fracture. But for now, they were together, and that mattered. "I don't know what I want," Celine finally said. "My father raised me to believe the Northern Kingdom was our enemy, that the Vales were murderers who'd never stop hunting us until every Nightfang was dead. I spent my whole life learning to fight, to hide, to survive in a world that wanted me erased." "You had good reason." And then I walk into that summit hall and feel the mate bond snap into place with the one person in the entire world I'm supposed to hate. She laughed, bitter. "The universe has a twisted sense of humor. Or it's trying to tell us something." "What? That we should ignore generations of bloodshed because biology says we're compatible?" "That maybe the bloodshed was the lie," Ronan said, "and the bond is the truth we've been avoiding." Celine closed her eyes. "I watched you fight the Devourer, watched you throw yourself between it and me over and over. You should have died. Any rational person would have let me handle it and saved themselves. I'm not rational when it comes to you. The mate bond won't let me be. That's not the mate bond. That's choice." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "You chose to protect me. Chose to trust what I was doing even though you had no proof it would work. Chose to stand when any sane person would have run. So did you. Running at Darius like that. No backup, no guarantee. I had you." The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Ronan felt something crack open in his chest. Not the mate bond, but something older. The walls he'd spent 10 years building. The armor that kept him functional but isolated. The belief that strength meant standing alone. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I know how to be a king. I know how to fight. I know how to make the hard decisions that get people killed for the greater good. But I don't know how to be someone's mate. Don't know how to balance what my wolf wants with what my kingdom needs." "Then we figure it out together," Celine said quietly. "Or we don't. But we make that choice consciously, not because some ancient magic decided for us." Before Ronan could respond, Marcus pushed through the tent flap, his expression grim. "We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The Northern Alphas are here, 30 of them, armed, demanding to speak with you immediately." Ronan stood despite his body's protests. "How many of ours are combat ready?" "Maybe 20. The rest are too injured, and before you ask, the Western packs are staying neutral. They'll defend the camp if attacked, but this is Northern Kingdom business." "Understood." Ronan looked at Celine. "Stay here. This is about to get political and ugly." "I'm coming with you." "You can barely stand." "Then I'll sit. But I'm not hiding while you face your own alphas." She forced herself upright, grimacing through the pain. "We're in this together, remember? Or was that just pretty words?" Ronan wanted to argue. Wanted to lock her in the tent where she'd be safe. But she was right. They were in this together. For better or worse. "Fine. But you stay behind me. And if fighting starts, you run. We'll see." They walked out together, Ronan moving slowly to match Celine's pace, acutely aware of every wolf watching them. The combined camps had spread across the foothills in rough territorial clusters, but the center area had become neutral ground where the different packs could interact without immediate violence. That's where the Northern Alphas were waiting. 30 wolves in full combat gear arranged in a semicircle that was clearly meant to be intimidating. At the center stood Kael, the ambitious young alpha who'd challenged Ronan in the war room at Clearwater Hold. Beside him, 3 others Ronan recognized. Wolves who'd served under Theron, who'd probably known about the betrayal, or at least suspected. The political calculus was obvious. With Theron dead and Ronan weakened, they were making a move. Testing whether he still had the strength to hold the Northern Kingdom, or if it was time for new leadership. "Alpha King," Kael said, managing to make the title sound like an insult. "You're alive. Surprising considering the reports we received." "Disappointing, you mean?" Ronan stopped 10 feet away, close enough to talk. far enough to react if this turned violent. Let's skip the posturing. What do you want? Answers. Accountability. An explanation for why you led 100 wolves into a suicide mission based on the word of a night fang. I led them to stop the Obsidian Circle from unleashing an ancient evil that would have destroyed every territory. We succeeded. 43 wolves died doing it. That's the explanation. 43 northern wolves, one of the other alphas corrected. Dead because you prioritized protecting your mate over protecting your kingdom. The accusation hung in the air like a thrown blade. Ronan could feel the weight of it, could feel every wolf in the camp watching to see how he'd respond. This was the moment. The test. The Northern Alphas were challenging not just his decisions, but his fundamental fitness to rule. 10 years ago, he would have crushed this rebellion immediately. Made an example. Reminded everyone what happened when you questioned the Alpha King. But 10 years ago, he'd been a weapon. Now he was trying to be something more. You're right, Ronan said quietly. The admission clearly wasn't what they'd expected. Kyle's expression flickered with confusion before settling back into calculated aggression. I prioritize protecting Celine Reverin, Ronan continued. My fated mate. The last guardian of a bloodline that's been keeping an ancient evil sealed away for generations. The woman whose knowledge and magic were the only things that stopped the devourer from consuming everything we know. He paused. So yes, I protected her, and I'd do it again. Even though it meant Northern Wolves died. Northern Wolves died fighting beside Western Wolves, Eastern Wolves, and Southern Wolves, Ronan said. They died as part of something larger than territorial disputes. They died stopping a threat that didn't care about pack politics or bloodlines or which alpha claimed which territory. He looked at each of the alphas in turn. And they died knowing their sacrifice mattered. That's more than most wolves get. Pretty speech, Kyle said. Doesn't change the fact that you're compromised. The mate bond has made you weak. Made you prioritize one person over the kingdom you're sworn to protect. The mate bond made me remember what I'm supposed to be protecting, Ronan corrected. For 10 years, I've been the kind of king who ruled through fear and absolute control, who made decisions based on revenge instead of justice, who turned the Northern Kingdom into something hard and efficient and completely isolated from every other pack. He gestured at the camp around them. Look at this. 4 territories working together. Ancient enemies standing side by side. That didn't happen because I was strong and unyielding. It happened because I was willing to change, to admit I was wrong, to trust someone I was supposed to hate. To betray your father's memory, Kael shot back. The words hit like a physical blow. Ronan felt his wolf surge forward, felt rage flood through him, hot and immediate. His hands clenched into fists, his vision sharpened. This was the line, the boundary that couldn't be crossed. But before he could respond, Celine stepped forward. Ronan's father believed in peace, she said, her voice carrying despite her weakness. He believed in ending the territorial conflicts. He died trying to create an alliance between the Northern Kingdom and the Nightfang clan. She looked at Kael. Everything Ronan has done in the past week, choosing trust over revenge, building alliances over walls, protecting his mate instead of pursuing a blood debt, that honors his father's memory more than 10 years of war ever could. Silence. Then Kael smiled, cold, calculated. And there it is, the Nightfang whispering poison in the Alpha King's ear, just like her father did. My father never... Your father was a liar and a manipulator who got King Aldrin killed, Kael interrupted. And now his daughter has seduced our king with a mate bond and pretty words and the promise of power. He looked at the assembled alphas. We didn't survive the Blood Moon War and 10 years of hunting just to hand the Northern Kingdom over to the enemy because our king can't resist biological imperatives. Several of the alphas signaled agreement. Ronan recognized the pattern. This wasn't just a challenge. This was a coup, carefully orchestrated. Kael had spent the past 3 days building support, convincing Northern Wolves that Ronan was compromised, positioning himself as the alternative. Smart. Efficient. Exactly the kind of political maneuvering Ronan had used to consolidate power a decade ago. So what's your proposal? Ronan asked. I step down? You take over? We pretend the past week never happened and go back to the way things were? The Northern Kingdom needs a king who puts the kingdom first, Kael said. If you can't do that, then yes. Step down. Let someone else lead. And if I refuse, then we make you step down, by force if necessary. 30 alphas against one wounded king. The math wasn't complicated. Ronan could fight, could probably take down 5 or 6 before they overwhelmed him. But it would be brutal, costly, and ultimately pointless because even if he won, he'd prove their point, that he was more interested in personal pride than the kingdom's stability. Behind him, he could feel Celine tensing, preparing to fight beside him despite her injuries. Could feel Marcus moving into position, ready to back whatever decision Ronan made. And across the camp, wolves from other territories were watching, judging, deciding whether the Northern Kingdom was stable enough to maintain alliances or if it was about to collapse into civil war. Everything he'd built in the past week, the fragile trust, the unprecedented cooperation, was balanced on the edge of this moment. Ronan thought about his father, about the man who'd believed in peace even when it got him killed, about the king who tried to build something better than endless territorial conflicts and blood debts that spanned generations, about the promise Ronan had carved into his own flesh. Every surviving Nightfang dies screaming. He'd built his entire identity around that promise, turned himself into the kind of king who never bent, never compromised, never showed weakness. And it had been based on a lie. So maybe it was time to stop being that king. Ronan reached up and pulled his shirt open, exposing the scar on his chest. The 7 words in the old tongue, carved deep enough to last forever. 10 years ago I made a promise, he said quietly. Right here, in this flesh, I swore that every surviving Nightfang would die screaming. I built the Northern Kingdom around that promise, made it the foundation of everything I did. He traced the scar with his fingers. It was based on a lie. My father wasn't killed by the Nightfang clan. He was killed by the Obsidian Circle, by people I trusted, by the same conspiracy that's been manipulating every pack for generations. He lowered his hand. I can't undo 10 years of decisions. Can't bring back the wolves who died because I was pointing my rage at the wrong target. Can't erase the damage I've done to my own kingdom by turning it into something hard and isolated and afraid. He looked at Kyle. But I can choose what I do next. And I choose to stop being the kind of king who rules through fear and absolute control. So you're stepping down, Kyle said, unable to hide the triumph in his voice. No, I'm changing what being king means. Ronan turned to address all the assembled wolves, northern, western, eastern, southern. For generations, we've been fighting each other. Territory disputes, blood debts, ancient grudges that none of us can even remember the origin of. The Obsidian Circle has been using those conflicts to keep us weak, divided, easy to manipulate. He gestured at the camp. But look at what we accomplished when we worked together. We stopped an ancient evil. We exposed a conspiracy that's been operating for centuries. We proved that wolves from different territories can fight beside each other instead of against each other. He paused. That's what I'm choosing to build. Not a northern kingdom that stands alone, but a unified territory where the old conflicts don't matter as much as the common threats. That's idealism, Kyle said. Your father tried the same thing. It got him killed. My father was ahead of his time, Ronan said, but maybe the world's finally caught up. He looked at Celine. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, hope mixed with fear, mixed with something that might have been pride. The mate bond isn't a weakness, Ronan continued. It's a bridge between bloodlines that have been enemies for generations, between kingdoms that have spent centuries finding reasons to hate each other. If I can stand here with Celine Raverin, if the son of Aldrin Vale can look at the daughter of Aldrich Raverin and choose trust over revenge, then maybe the rest of you can too. Silence stretched across the camp. Then Garrett stepped forward from the Western contingent. The Western packs support this. We'll work with any Northern king who prioritizes unity over isolation. One of the Eastern Alphas signaled agreement. The Eastern Conclave as well. We're tired of fighting shadows while the real enemy operates unopposed. Even a Southern wolf, not Marcos, but a younger alpha named Senna, nodded. The Southern Coalition is willing to discuss formal alliances, if the Northern Kingdom is serious about change. One by one, wolves from other territories added their support. But the Northern Alphas remained silent. Kael's expression had gone carefully blank, the kind of face you made when a plan was falling apart, and you needed to recalculate quickly. Pretty words, he finally said. Easy promises when you're surrounded by witnesses. But when we get back to the Northern Territories, when it's just us, You'll go right back to being the king you've always been. Then watch me, Ronan said. Come back to the Northern Kingdom. Serve under me. And if I break these promises, if I return to ruling through fear instead of building alliances, then challenge me properly, in front of the whole kingdom, according to the old laws. You're serious. Completely. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove I've changed. And if I fail, you can remove me according to tradition instead of through a coup in a refugee camp. Kale studied him for a long moment. The calculation was written all over his face, weighing the political advantage of pushing the coup, now against the risk of looking like he was too impatient to follow proper protocol. 3 months, Kyle finally said. I'll give you 3 months to prove these alliances are more than just words. If the Northern Kingdom hasn't formalized treaties with at least 2 other territories by then, I call a formal challenge. Agreed. They sealed it the old way, gripping forearms, letting blood mix where claws had partially extended. Binding, traditional, witnessed by every alpha present. When Kyle and his wolves withdrew, Marcus appeared at Ronan's shoulder. That was either the smartest thing you've ever done or the most catastrophically stupid. Probably both, Ronan admitted, but it bought us time. And time is what we need to actually make this work. 3 months to formalize treaties that usually take years to negotiate, no pressure. We've done harder things in the past week, Marcus snorted. Barely. And we almost died doing it. Over the next several days, the camp began to break up as the different territories prepared to return home. Wounded wolves were stabilized enough for transport, supplies were distributed, arrangements were made for future communications. The Western packs left first, Garrett making a point of clasping forearms with Ronan and promising to send envoys within the month to begin formal treaty discussions. The Eastern Conclave followed, more reserved but equally committed to exploring alliances. The Southern Coalition took longest to depart, Marco spending hours with Ronan discussing specific terms, territories, trade routes. Hard negotiations between hard men, but negotiations nonetheless. The Northern Wolves stayed until last, Kyle maintaining his position as watcher and judge, making sure everyone knew this wasn't acceptance but temporary truce. And through it all, Ronan worked alongside Celine, letting the other alphas see them together, letting the mate bond become a visible symbol of the unity he was trying to build instead of a weakness to exploit. It wasn't easy. The politics were brutal. Every conversation was a negotiation. Every agreement came with conditions and clauses, and the understanding that trust had to be earned through action instead of promise through words. But slowly, painfully, it started to take shape. The framework of something new, something that hadn't existed in living memory. An alliance built not on convenience or temporary necessity, but on the shared understanding that the old ways, the endless territorial conflicts, the blood debts spanning generations, had made them all vulnerable to threats they didn't see coming. 2 weeks after the battle at the ruins, Ronan and Celine stood on a cliff overlooking the valley where the combined camps had been. Empty now. Abandoned. Just churned snow and the ghosts of fires that had burned bright and brief. It's strange, Celine said quietly. 3 weeks ago, I walked into that summit hall expecting to die, hoping I could at least deliver the message about the obsidian circle before someone killed me. And instead you got a mate bond with the person most likely to kill you. Exactly. She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Ronan had seen from her. The universe definitely has a sense of humor. Or it's trying to teach us something. What? That everything we thought we knew was wrong? That maybe what we thought we knew was keeping us from seeing what actually mattered? Ronan looked out across the valley. My father used to say that the hardest part of being a leader wasn't making decisions. It was accepting that you'd made wrong ones and having the courage to change course. You think he'd be proud of what you're trying to build? I think he'd be relieved. He spent his whole life trying to end the territorial conflicts, trying to create something better than endless war. Ronan paused. I spent 10 years destroying that dream. Maybe the next 10 I can rebuild it. Celine was quiet for a moment. Then, I haven't said yes to the mate bond, to staying, to any of this. I know. You're giving me the choice, letting me decide whether to accept this or walk away. That's what choice means. Most alphas wouldn't. Most would see the mate bond as binding, irrevocable, something you don't get to refuse. I'm trying not to be like most alphas. Celine turned to face him fully. I can feel it, the bond. Every time you're close, every time you move away. It's like someone rewired my entire nervous system and I can't turn it off. Same. And I spent my whole life learning to hate the Northern Kingdom, learning to see the Vales as monsters who'd never stop hunting my family until we were all dead. You had good reason.